but everything changes. So I'll take what I can get. And since the other day when you swept me away, it's like I'm blinded. I'm blinded. Rachel, did you mean to set me on fire too? So bright, I am blinded. I'm blinded.
Okay. Welcome everyone. I am Desma. I am here today with Riley Hawke. Say hello.
Hello.
And we are also here with Koethe. Say hello.
Hey there.
If you've listened to our previous two recordings, then you probably already know who these folks are, but just in case you do not, they are both musicians who have become known in the Life is Strange fandom for composing covers of songs from the games, as well as primarily original tracks that they write themselves based on the themes and the story in the game. And then as for me, I am primarily a writer, and I've been writing a sort of large Life is Strange fanfiction project for a couple of years. Unfortunately, my girlfriend Molly Fiable can't join us right now just because of time zone differences. We're already stretched across two time zones right now, and she's over in England at the moment. But I will be recording a section with her separately that I'll probably edit after this one. So that will be that. But we are here today to have another discussion about the third episode of Deck 9's Life is Strange Before the Storm, which released was it only a week ago from this recording?
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Exactly.
It feels like it's been longer.
Oh, geez. It really feels like it's been longer than that. But yeah, it's only been a week.
Wow.
Yeah, that's true. So the episode came out on December 27th. We're recording on December 20th. We're recording on December 27th. So it's only been a week, but I guess between that episode launching and then Christmas happening, it feels like it's been longer than a week. Oh man. But yeah, so with that episode released, the story arc for this prequel has been told. We are going to be getting a fourth bonus episode that is not connected to the story, apparently, entitled Farewell, that they told us is coming sometime early 2018. I'm going to guess February, but maybe they'll need to take a little bit of extra time. I don't know the scope of that extra episode. But that bonus episode has been designed and intended to be a goodbye to these characters, specifically to Max and Chloe. I had one of my contacts at Deck 9 is an associate producer, and I specifically asked her, and she told me, I don't know exactly what Square might intend to do with this franchise going forward, but we've made this episode, or we are making this episode with the intent of it being a goodbye to these characters. So that did make me feel a little more relieved about that, as well as confirmation that Ashley and Hannah are returning, which yeah, I guess I'll ask you guys about that real quick before we talk about the main story, but because that is something that happened in between these recordings. But Riley, how did that make you feel to find out that those two are coming back, and to hear a little bit about what this episode will be about?
I mean, it's kind of cool. I'm not that excited about the farewell episode. Probably because I can't really imagine what they're gonna do with it. That would be really cool. I feel like I'm gonna play it. I think it's gonna be fun. Also, Hannah and Ashley for that game, they were mostly Max and Chloe as adults, and they had just a few scenes of them as younger girls.
That's true.
I don't know. The voices were already different for that. So
that's a good point.
I'm just kind of waiting, which probably means I'll actually quite enjoy it because my expectations are pretty low.
Yeah. What about you, Koethe? How do you feel about what we know of that episode so far?
I'm looking forward to it, but it kind of what Riley was saying. I think there is an element of I don't actually know what, other than I'm sure it's going to be a very emotional experience. I'm sure it is going to be genuinely very heartfelt. I do wonder what it's going to be like depending, like you're saying, the scope of it. I kind of wonder what it's going to be like to see Hannah and Ashley kind of getting these roles back, but being able to flesh out these younger versions of these characters. A lot of
Yeah.
what we know of them as Max, personality-wise, we actually only know her as an adult. We don't really ever get to see natural young
Right. Yeah,
version of
that's
Max,
true.
and we only get like very minuscule interactions with young Chloe. So I think
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see what they do there and how much they're able to bring that same level of emotion while also, keeping it within the bounds of, this is their young version before we necessarily have some of that developed emotion, and especially how much of an impact is Deck Nine's, more negative focus on Max, or I guess Chloe's negative feelings toward Max in Before the Storm going to kind of impact how you feel about Max and Chloe in those sequences.
Yeah, that's a good point
Gosh,
too.
I
I'm
hope
wondering
not.
if they're... Yeah, I'm hoping not as well. That was something that I was not quite anticipating with this prequel that really seems to have kind of taken off in a way that's unfortunate. I've seen a lot of people like within the fandom or that have become fans because of this game just like really not liking Max's character. I'm like, she's not even here to, like, I don't know, metaphorically defend herself, if that makes sense, because at least in the first game a lot of people really did not like Chloe, but like Chloe was in a lot of the story, so like if you didn't like her, it was just kind of like, well, I guess you don't understand this character, or maybe you didn't make the decision to try and understand this character. Whereas with this game, it's like she's not there.
The game is very directly telling you Max is bad,
right?
And like that's it. There isn't really like an alternate side to it in the vacuum of just Before the Storm.
Yeah, which, I mean, I get that what they're really going for is this is a story from Chloe's perspective, and that's how Chloe feels, and like I get that, but it is really unsatisfying to not have any like resolution to that, because the resolution to that is like the final journal entry, I think, or whatever, the final letter she writes to Max is basically like, yeah, I don't need you anymore, bye. And I was like, ouch, like what?
That works very well in the context of Before the Storm, but like
it does
outside of that, you're like, how does that make you feel about how things end up in, how does that, I guess, warp your view of their relationship and their interactions in the first game?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a way it kind of, in a way, for me, those letters that Chloe has written and some of the things in episode 1, because they really kind of dropped referencing Max in the actual game in episodes 2 and 3, which is probably for the better.
Yeah.
But the culmination of everything they've done with that in this game does kind of make me feel good in a way, like within like both games, like the story that they're both connected through with those two characters, like it, I don't know, I guess the way that they were portraying that made sense to me, that like Max was so important to Chloe at that point in her life that it really did devastate her to not have that connection anymore.
Yeah.
And then to have it come back at another really bad point in her life, like it made sense why she simultaneously would have such a grudge, but also be able to get over that grudge so quickly. Because they, like, that whole first game only takes place over the course of like a week, or maybe not even a week. And like for that 5-year gap to be there, and for her to be like stewing in all of these negative emotions that Deck 9 has presented, like it, I don't know, like it does feel satisfying to go back to stuff in the first game and to see her character like trying to reconcile with that, like being so angry that this person like failed her and let her down during this part of her life, but then also like opening up so quickly to like being so receptive to Max being back in her life. That's kind of interesting, but yeah, it is still kind of like weird and unsatisfying to me to have Max talked about so much. I wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm wondering if they were trying to get at kind of what happened with Rachel in the first game, where that character is talked about, but she's not there to like really, I don't know, again, metaphorically defend herself. I don't know, Riley, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's the first time I thought of that. That's kind of interesting. I guess if somebody were playing Before the Storm before they play the original game, it could kind of act like that. I think because we already know Max, it doesn't like have the same effect. But that I wonder. I have wondered quite a lot about what people's experience of the two games would be if you played them in the order before the storm and then the original game. But that's kind of a different thing, I guess.
What about you, Andrew? Any thoughts on that?
I definitely think that actually does sound like, trying to think about it at least in terms of only knowing before the storm, not having the experience of the game proper. It does, I think, at least have a very similar feeling, because all you actually end up knowing about Max is Max was someone that was hyper important who is gone now. And in that isolation, especially having her referred to a little more heavily during the first episode, kind of I think in the very first journal entry, you actually get the little sketch drawing of Max as well, which I think is kind of similar to the the missing posters you see of Rachel in episode 1 of the original series. So I definitely can see that if you are playing these games, in terms of actual chronology in the universe rather than when they've come out for us, that would definitely create kind of a similar vibe. The only difference being, I guess, that Max isn't, like you said, they kind of drop a lot of the overt mentionings of Max after episode 1.
Yeah. Definitely interesting in that regard. But I guess we can get into like the actual like events of the episode itself. Now I'm trying to, I've like been thinking so much about this episode that the events are kind of a little scattered for me. But how did this episode opens basically with that big emotional kind of backstory reveal with Sarah and James's backstory. Yeah, which was very interesting. Andrew, what were your thoughts on that sequence?
The very, very interesting. I loved the stylistic direction they took with it. And I really loved the character driven changes they made with it. I really liked going right from the end of episode 2 where you're pretty much dead set on, okay, Rachel Amber's dad is garbage. He's a piece of shit. He's terrible. He's a liar, and he's betraying people, and you have all these negative feelings about him. And that, at least in that first opening sequence, the way that he positions himself and the way that the game kind of positions him, they do a really great job of, at least I felt, kind of cutting off your expectations. I was expecting that episode to start kind of more from the angry Rachel perspective. We leave with Rachel smashing the table, and I was expecting the game is going to pick up with, Rachel storming out of the house and Chloe chasing after her, and there's some big thing that goes on with that. And it starts off with this very, very like grounded, pretty realistic, I would think at least, depiction of like, all right, kids, let's sit down and we're going to talk this out kind of thing. And I liked that a lot. I thought that was a very interesting one. I liked the way that the game kind of plays with you. With, at least to me, I right off the bat was like, you know what? I don't necessarily like the way he handles things, but I can very much see what Mr. Amber's talking about in these sequences. I can very much understand why he, at least here in this isolated sequence, is saying what he's saying.
Yeah. What about you, Riley? Do you have any thoughts on that scene?
I thought Rachel's dad was quite sympathetic in this scene. What he was saying made a lot of sense. I think my favorite part of it was probably the parallels that I could see pretty overtly between Rachel and her mom, her biological mom. I really liked how they played that out. There was a specific animation that I think it's because I had just made a video with it that I recognized it. But Rachel, there's a specific animation where she's kind of twirling around in the street, and they use like the same one for her mom. And I'm just like, that's, I don't know if it was just to save a little time or or if it was meant to be, quite so overt.
Deliberate.
But that was probably my favorite part about it.
Yeah, that was my favorite part about it too. Which, I mean, it ended up frustrating me by the end of the story because like I felt like they never did anything with that correlation. Like it felt so overt during that scene. I was like, oh, interesting. So that means that they're probably going to be alluding to that connection, and like something in the story here is going to like force the player to confront that correlation, because it's this whole dramatic irony of like, we know that Rachel goes down a pretty similar path, and that Chloe is similarly unable to prevent that from happening, but like we know that she would try to, and like that I felt like could have been interesting. And I mean, I guess it as I've said multiple times, I feel like deciding to have the story take place over the course of 3 days was kind of like a, I don't know, kind of I feel like they kind of shot themselves in the foot in terms of like
overall
what they could do with
really
it.
Does feel like it was definitely meant to be a like a 5-episode game, and I feel like they may have been, because at least at that point I was like, I really feel like a lot of this development needs to happen over the course of 5 days. I feel like they could have fleshed a lot more out if they'd had a little more space.
Yeah, on the other hand, I feel like they kind of didn't have enough, like, I don't know, like substance to justify 5 episodes, which is probably why they didn't.
See that.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, there's so many like broad, like basic pillars of how this story was designed that I feel like if one of them had just been different, it would have given them a lot more room to do these kinds of things they seemed like they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And one of them is that I feel like it shouldn't have, like if it had taken place over the course of like a year or 2 years or 3 years or something longer than 3 days, that could have helped. But it did only take place over the course of 3 days, so here we are. With that, I did really like that more cinematic presentation of the backstory thing. But it did also kind of confuse me in a way, because I was like, whoa, we're like getting all like avant-garde with this. And
I was gonna say that it was super out of context for the way that the game. I loved the hell out of it, but it was a total tonal jump. And I think it was you, Desma, who was talking last time about how the previous episode is the first time we've ever seen sequence from the non-player character's point of view, when you have that focus of Rachel and everything kind of gets muffled and like the rage sound, the ringing starts happening. And I thought this was kind of an interesting, like almost extreme evolution of that, was taking this like hyper artistic, like cinematic. It was a really clever way, I thought, to handle what was just, raw exposition at that point. But
yeah, that's true.
It was a very different way than we've seen it before.
Yeah. And because everyone has brought this up, we are definitely bringing this up. James's voice acting was way too slow and like weird.
James, I thought her mom's voice acting was like way worse.
Yeah, the mom was
It was so funny. Like I kept making jokes about it while we were playing because it was just so painful.
Yeah, when me and Jenny were playing through it, we ran into the same. Like there got to a point where we started making fun of like how slow the voice delivery was.
It's ridiculous.
It's like, oh, man.
And you don't even know if it was the voice actor or if it was how they edited it for some strange reason.
Yeah,
so it's like you don't even know who to blame.
Like, I don't know, part of me wonders if they were like, well, we want to have there be enough time to show this whole animation play out, so let's just have him talk slower.
Really slow, and that ended up translating into like a lot less emotion being able to come across.
Yeah, whereas it would have been better to just like have them speak at normal speed and just edit your placement well, and then leave a little bit of silence to like, let whatever you're watching kind of with what was just said like soak in. I feel like that would have been more effective, but that is what it is. But and so then from that scene we get that scene up in Rachel's room. Andrew, what did you think about that one?
I liked that one a lot too. One thing I did find myself thinking overall, and this was kind of one of those things where I was wondering, like, was this intended to be over a longer period of time, and they ended up shifting that later after they'd written the bulk of the story, is that like we go from barely knowing Rachel in episode 1, we're just jumping on the boxcar with her in episode 1, to crawling into bed, arm around her to comfort her, which isn't to say that's outside the scope of possibility, but it was quick. It was very quick, and I guess going into the episode anticipating that, I loved the hell out of the scene. I thought it was fantastic. Thinking back upon it, I'm like, yeah, that's like super, especially when you think about like Chloe being super awkward. I can't believe it's Rachel Amber in episode 1.
Yeah.
Down to like absolute number one most important thing in my life. You saved me. She's my angel. Like we're already there by the end of episode 3.
Right. Yeah.
That felt like, I kind of had to retcon that in my head, I guess, and be like, this took place over the course of a year and a half. Like, I don't care what the game is telling me. The game, clearly they just misspoke something at some point and I missed it. And I'm just not going to go back and try to disprove that. But it took place over a year and a half, and that's, once I got to that point, I was able to just like enjoy the scene for what it was.
Yeah. I can, that whole kind of weird retconning-ish kind of idea is something I can relate with a lot with this game, because they were just, I mean, this is kind of like its own subtopic that we don't quite need to get into, but just like how many inconsistencies with canon there were, like it got very distracting, and I felt like it was even more distracting in this episode, maybe just because I wasn't as into the episode, so I was noticing them more. I'm not sure, but so Riley, how did you feel about that scene up in Rachel's room?
It was probably one of my favorites out of the episode, actually. Part of that was just the wonderful voice acting that was done for Rachel. Like the whole talking. Yeah. I even tweeted. I think her name's Kylie Brown. Tweeted at her because I thought it was so good. It was a real standout. I think that they did a great job with the design of Rachel's room. It was really cool. It was really fun to walk around and look at the stuff. Their conversation was. I mean, I kind of agree with Koethe that it was like I have to suspend my disbelief, and this was something I had to do from the very first episode, so I was kind of used to it. I wasn't going to sit there and like continue to be angry about the fact that this was all happening too fast, because that's like just part of the game. But yeah.
I think something that I.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things I personally really liked about that sequence, at least to me, it felt very, arguably more so than a lot of the other parts, that felt like something that was very relatable to me personally. That was, watching that whole sequence, it was something that was, I felt like, oh yeah, I remember being in these types of situations at that age, comforting a sad friend in this exact type of scenario, and like that very much felt like it was a. I get that hit a little closer to home in certain respects for me, which I really liked as well.
Yeah.
And it was.
I like.
Sorry, just it was. I think one of the reasons it was one of my favorite scenes too is because it was really like, we'll talk about the rest of the episode, but it was really one of the only scenes that seemed like a real continuation of the story thus far. It was Chloe and Rachel hanging out, talking, and so it just felt like one of the scenes that was the most consistent with the story they'd been telling so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I really liked that the details in Rachel's room imply that she does have more of a self-awareness of her, like, the way that she relates to other people, in particular, like the way that she can be very persuasive with other people. Like just some of the quotes in her room and a lot of the astrology stuff and all of that. I don't know. I just like that adds that, because we already kind of like the first game does imply stuff with her being into astrology, which has its thematic whatever, like kind of symbolic meanings, but also just the literal. That's her kind of personality. She's just really into that, and this idea of like people fall into these different kinds of types, and certain types work together and certain types don't, and blah blah blah. I did like I liked what did they say? They said that there was like this really brilliant little line, probably one of my favorite parts of the episode, where they talk about how, that sad discovery of finding out when you get older or whatever, when someone teaches you that a lot of the stars we see up in the sky at night is just light from a star that's already dead. And it just, like, I was like, oh wow, that's like got some really cool like layers to it in relation to the story and everything. So I thought that was really interesting. I like that it contextualized, if you choose in episode 2 for Rachel to get a tattoo, that they draw a star on her wrist. But Jenny pointed out that Chloe is the one that actually draws that star, but that's before Chloe has any idea that Rachel is into stars. So like that's kind of weird that she would like know that. Like it felt like something that they came up with the idea and then added that detail in episode 2, but forgot to like contextualize it in any way. But I just thought that's kind of interesting. I also found it. I think one of the things I liked about this scene, because I do think this is one of the better scenes in the episode, is that it continues that really interesting balance of how Rachel is both good and not so good for Chloe, like how their relationship is both good and not so good. I kind of didn't notice it at first when I was playing, just because I was trying to take in like, honestly, I was partially just trying to take in the voice acting because I do think it was noticeably good during that scene. But Jenny pointed out to me that over the course of that scene, you know, Rachel's all like emotionally devastated and like all of this, and Chloe's trying to comfort her, and yet Rachel is still persuading Chloe to do these things for her.
Yep. It's like she can't turn
with
it
regard.
off.
Right, exactly. And what I love so much about that is that usually when people talk about like, oh, Rachel's manipulative, usually people are like, the implication is she's like trying to be a puppet master and get everyone to do what she wants. Like, no, that's not how, in real life, people in these kinds of situations get manipulated unintentionally, and that's why it happens, because neither party is like self-aware that that's what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's one of the best things about Before the Storm in general, is their characterization of Rachel strikes a really good balance between like you feel sympathetic towards her, and you can understand why she is trying to achieve whatever these goals, like mainly her goal of just trying to escape this town and this life that she's gotten sick of. But they also do a good job of showing how she, whether intentionally or not, can like be very manipulative of people, like persuading them to do things for her, rather than doing them herself. And it was just really interesting to me that I was so involved in like the emotional moment of that scene, but Jenny was like right on that, like, oh, she asked about this, she asked about this, she asked about that, and I was like, oh my god, you're right, she's like still playing her, like probably not meaning to, but like that, like you said, she just can't turn it off. And I do feel that there's another scene later where that same thing happens, but yeah, so I do think it was a very like cute scene, but I guess just because of the perspective I'm coming at this whole story from, it's like hard for me to like admire that. I'm just like, yep, it is cute, and it is also temporary.
Yeah, which is
like,
great. Like you said,
yeah.
they did that the whole. You know, I would say they did that throughout the whole game. You know, with Rachel, except for a little bit in this last episode.
Yeah. So what happens after that? I think we get the last. Well, depending on how you interpret it, we get a dream sequence after this, don't we? Where she's on stage with William.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What did you think about that scene, Riley?
What did I think about that scene? Not too many thoughts, actually. It was like, it was a bit interesting. It seemed, I didn't really get what they were trying to say with it. I think is whatever, because I can't remember it very well. I think it was Victoria that like booed at them or something, so that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Oh, also, one of the only times, maybe even the only time I cried during the game a little bit was when William kind of got hit by the truck. I thought they did that very well.
Oh yeah, that was
at the very end.
More...
That really hit me. So that was cool about it. And as always, I forgot to read the journal during the dream sequence. I had to find out about it later.
Oh, yep. Yeah, they did another clever, weird thing with that, too.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that part, Koethe?
This is going to be a repeating theme here. I loved pretty much this entire episode, so get ready for a whole lot of that for every time.
That's good, because I'm not feeling too positive on it, so it's good to have some positive
I figured I was going to be the
it.
odd one out. I've heard so many criticisms, and I think they're all entirely valid, and yet for some reason I'm like, I just loved it so much.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I thought this sequence, to me, was probably my favorite of the dream sequences.
Okay.
Just from a like realistic dream standpoint, I guess, because it felt like a dream. The other ones felt like cinematic dreams. Like we need to show what something is representative here. This one really felt to me like this is exactly what dreams are like. This is your brain randomly defragging information that you absorbed in the past however long, and just kind of like combining it into this weird mismatch of things. And so I love that a lot. I absolutely loved the voice acting at the very end. Just what Christina was saying, especially when the "look at me, sweetie, it's gonna be okay" sequence, and then Chloe's scream when her dad dies. I thought that was that was probably some of the best. Like, it was just a short little snippet. It was some of I thought the best in the entire game. I'm really 50-50 how I feel about that boo at the end, because I understand.
Yeah, me too.
I understand that it was there to transition us out of this ultra heavy sequence back into like casual gameplay at Chloe's house, but I don't know how I think it's because I liked the sequence that was right before it so much that I almost just wanted to end on that, as opposed to having like the, you know, let the transition be a little more clunky rather than make it into a joke. But I don't know how I felt about it having the joke. I thought it was hilarious. I was,
I can't get over how funny, and I know, like, I like Victoria, so I'm torn about it as a character, and I think they made her like a caricature of herself in this game and stuff. But I can't get over how funny she is in this game. Like,
yeah, it's for me, I guess the way I would probably put it is that a lot of the stuff that they did with Victoria in this game is funny, but I'm annoyed because I feel like it's things that shouldn't be funny.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I don't know how funny Victoria was supposed to be, as far as like, oh, haha, bad things happen to her funny. I don't really know how much of that was supposed to be her character.
Yeah, she like I said, it seemed like she was just a caricature of herself the whole game.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
But as long as I like, and I like her, so it could annoy me a little bit, but it was just so funny that I don't care.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm confused as to, like, I mean, I guess maybe just the simple reason, like, that she's in this story is so that they could have someone that you were familiar with that they could caricaturize in that way. Because I'm just like, what other purpose does Victoria serve in this entire story?
Yeah.
She doesn't serve one, and she's technically not even supposed to be at the school yet. So, like, why? And it really just feels like they just wanted to have fun making fun of Victoria.
They wanted to give you a character to shit on, basically.
Yeah,
rather than make a new character, here's a character most people already have a somewhat negative disposition towards.
Yeah,
so
not so sure I'm approving of that as a concept, but yeah. But then I guess I should probably touch on, I will definitely agree with you, Koethe, on how this one felt more like an actual dream. And part of me wonders if that was intentional because of the way that they kind of shifted gears with that stuff in this episode, which I guess we'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, I did like this dream sequence a lot in regards to it feeling like an actual dream and these kind of, fragments of ideas. I also liked the editing of it, like the audio and some of the camera stuff, like just kind of feeling like this, I don't know, like they were trying to do a stage play. Like, I think there's a part when Chloe gets up from the chair and it makes like a car door opening sound.
Yeah,
and she
just
swings
makes
her
all
hand
the
and
sound effects.
makes a car closing sound. I was like, oh, that's cute. Like, it's a play.
I found myself during that sequence at one point legitimately thinking, like, wow, the guy playing Williams doing a great job keeping his arm up there. Like, he's really, I was like, wait, this is a
right.
Like, they just rigged his arm up there. But for some reason, I found myself
I had that thought too, actually.
Legitimately thinking it. And I had to catch myself. I was like, wait, no, like, that's like super easy. It's actually like one of the easier things to do as far as video gaming. But like,
yep.
I thought that they did a good job at making it feel human, I guess, during that sequence, which was cool.
Yeah, they did. So then after that sequence, Chloe wakes up, and then we get this kind of like sort of makeover-ish kind of scene where she dyes her hair and then like goes through her dad's clothes and like changes into clothes that I guess her dad supposedly used to own.
Yeah, dad's clothes and mom's boots and miscellaneous. It was unclear where some of these incredibly hot designer outfits came from. But
yeah.
They were there somewhere.
If I'm recalling right, that sequence kind of like implies where the bullet necklace came from. I guess suggesting that it was Williams, maybe. Like, it's just kind of there.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. I'm just like, oh, like she's getting, the bullet necklace. She has it now. Like,
Yeah,
wasn't
like
clear where
I
it came
was.
from.
Yeah, I was expecting them to not even like get into that because I just kind of assumed that was a thing she didn't get until later for some reason,
Yeah.
and to just have it be there with no real like context was like, oh, this is like such a like iconic part of her design. I feel like, and they just kind of it's just there
Yeah, I feel
because
like
they
they
go
didn't
through
need
like
to
all
do
the other
that.
iconic parts of her. Yeah, all the other iconic parts of her design. Like I feel like they play some kind of lip service to or fan service to in some regard. Um, but so so the thing with the hair dye is that I don't know how I feel about it. So one of the things about the hair dye bit is that that's not actually how hair dye would work, which is something that Jenny raised because Jenny dyes her hair. Um, you wouldn't just like go in the shower and use hair dye and your hair would be blue. Like you would have to like bleach that part of your hair and then you'd have to like do some other stuff to it and it like wouldn't turn out the right shade of blue like and that's more technical so like not a big deal but also her hair was already supposed to have that blue streak in it by this point in her life because in the first game when you're hopping across timelines one of the differences is whether or not Chloe has the blue streak in her hair at her 16th birthday. And in the main primary reality that the main story of Life is Strange takes place in, she has that blue streak in her hair on her 16th birthday, whereas this game is taking place after her 16th birthday. So that's like another example of like my brain being like, wait, that's not right, and like trying to reconcile like how that doesn't match with canon, but I'm supposed to accept it as canon, like just this weird whatever. Uh But Jenny and I did find it cute that they, tried to imply, well, like the reason why she has it is because, like, maybe she used to dye her hair blue or wanted to dye her hair blue from hanging out with Max. And there is stuff in the first game when they're kids where like Chloe seemed obsessed with that color, for hair because there's like an anime inspired drawing of like a character with blue hair, or maybe I think there's a magazine cover has someone with blue hair, and then she references that Blade Runner character having blue hair. So like it's like I like that they tried to contextualize that's where the idea came from. And then we go straight from that to the sequence with Joyce and David. So I'll ask you, Riley, just between the restyling herself and then talking with Joyce and David, how'd you feel about that whole scene?
Pretty neutral. Like I thought it was kind of fun. I thought it was like I kind of thought it was really unnecessary that we see Chloe dressed like the Chloe that we know and love from the original game because it's like 3 years later. I don't know. So, but whatever. And then the Joyce and David thing, I thought it was cute. I felt kind of good about how they were kind of trying to make it work. And David was kind of letting her in on a little story. I thought the story was a bit like lame. Like it was pretty. There wasn't anything very interesting about it. And then he tries to give her the picture, and I'm like, what? I remember joking about this with my wife. We were like, what is she supposed to do with this picture? Just like carry it around. But you have to take it because it would be really douchey not to take it. But it was a bit weird. I felt like they could have done something a little bit better with it, a little more interesting.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that sentiment. What about you, Andrew? What did you feel about this scene?
The restyling sequence, I found myself thinking the exact same thing you did, Desma. I was very much like, I knew, I was like, this already should have happened, based on what we've learned in the first game. And I'm like, the whole sequence when she was watching, I'm like, oh, she's going to dye her hair kind of thing. As soon as she was like, I got to take the shower, and we were going to the bathroom, I was like, she's going to inexplicably have the hair dye. And I found myself trying to like explain it away. Like, maybe the reason she's so mad in the photo is because it was actually her 17th birthday and David forgot. And like, that was my immediate, way to try to correct that. I did think this is probably, I think, arguably the lower point in the episode as far as just kind of being there. I really liked the sequence where you see Joyce and David interacting on their own. I thought that was actually
that
nice.
was cute.
I did like that.
I was like, because we don't really get to see a whole lot of that. All we get to see is like Joyce kind of cowers beneath David sometimes, and David seems like the kind of person who would fly off the handle and be kind of abusive and a dick. And like, I was like, I don't know if I feel like there was always that like Loomis, even in the first game and earlier in this one, I was like, I don't know if I necessarily like them together, because it seems like, but this was like, okay, no, when Chloe isn't around, they actually are legitimately like a very friendly, happy, normal couple. And I thought that was a really nice sequence to kind of round out that particular part of those two characters.
Yeah, I thought, I really liked that moment where you get to see them making each other happy, partially because, like you said, it's just a thing we haven't seen much, and like we've known these characters since the first game, and like they've never, across both games, they've barely really presented like, why are these two married? Like, how do they?
Never really
they're always like arguing,
saying like, "Oh, he makes me happy," but like,
really
but there's don't tell.
Yeah. But another detail I really liked was that we aren't just seeing that scene happen for the sake of happening. Like, we're seeing it from Chloe's perspective, witnessing it herself, and you can see in her body language and in her just like her facial expression, her body language, you can see that, like, that really complicated feeling of like, oh, when I'm not here, not fucking everything up, they're happy. So maybe I shouldn't be around them so much.
Am I
like,
the
just,
problem? You know, they're
right,
happy. Why
exactly.
am I not happy?
And it's I just thought that was a really nice moment of like nonverbal storytelling with her character. That I wanted to see more moments like that with this trio of characters, because I felt like each episode we have like this whole scene with them, and the first two episodes it was basically just rehashing stuff we already know it happens later. Like, there's no, like, I feel like this concept of this scene in a way might have worked better earlier. Because it would have given them more room to like, okay, you know, they're trying to make this work and whatever, but and then maybe have that culminate with, you know, Chloe doing what she did in the last episode, just kind of walk in and be like, oh, I can't be in this house if he's in this house, whatever. But I don't know. Or do you agree with Riley that David's story was a little too like simple, like it didn't have enough to it? But when I was playing through that scene, I was actually caught off guard, because I was like, oh, they're actually like trying to contextualize why David's character like relates, you know, is trying to relate with Chloe, and like the story they present, or the concept of the story, like makes sense like realistically from what I can try to imagine of David's perspective. But yeah, it ultimately is just like, this is just an anecdote that's just kind of here, and now we're moving on. Oh, but here, take this very sentimental personal photo. Just like, oh, okay. After you guys have just been like yelling at each other all the time, you're just gonna like, okay. Like, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but
I liked it as a story.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you actually mentioned maybe a minute or two ago, I don't necessarily love the ordering they chose to portray David's character. I love each sequence kind of on its own. I really liked the like I said, the happiness which he enjoys, and I thought that, you know, while his story was kind of more run of the mill, it was a very, you know, average war story. There was nothing especially you know, depthy for him, I suppose. But it did feel like it was contextualizing him a little more. I kind of wish that they would have put that maybe in episode 2, and then maybe had this sequence be the storm off sequence.
Right. I think that might have thematically worked better, or just like narratively worked better.
The reason being, especially when you go into we leave on like a hype. I mean, I took the photo. I don't know what happens if you tell him to fuck off and don't take the photo, but I felt like, at least in my playthrough, we left off on like a pretty solid note with David. The problem I have with that is that it seems like in both seasons now, his character arc has been David not as bad as you thought he was, you know? And it seems like, how do we get back to, from I'm going to trust you from here on out, how do we get from that to, are you smoking weed and smacking Chloe in episode 1? That seems like that's a pretty, you know, cameras all over the house. There has to be something that goes on specifically between him and Chloe, not just, oh, he gets a job at Blackwell and becomes obsessed with that, because it still seems like it's the war thing. And I feel like we don't ever have that. That seems like a component I think should have been included, or the order should have been switched to show, like, I understand, we don't show, you know, what happens with Rachel and Frank, because that's, at least until before the Storm 2 comes out.
Jeez.
We don't. That's something I feel is better left to imagination to some extent. But
Yeah.
I feel like the David thing is something that, like, that's an established character change we have now. I
Right.
feel like we need to know what happened there.
Well, I think with David, it's less of like what happened to make Chloe hate him, and more that this small scene, this scene that we saw, wasn't enough. You know, it was just what was one ray of sunshine in an otherwise gloomy relationship. I think it's probably more so the case, and that it just faded. You know, you like, if somebody that you have a rocky relationship with, you can have a good day, but then it might degrade back to what it was.
I can definitely see that too.
Yeah. I guess in general, now that the story is concluded, like, I'm just generally frustrated with the David and Joy stuff because it just feels kind of, overall, like, it feels pointless, and that really kind of bums me out, because going into this prequel, it's like, well, if it's going to be from Chloe's perspective, we got to get some Joyce character development. Like, she's such a good character that, like, is so underutilized. They barely do anything with her across both games, and it just makes me sad that we don't, like, they definitely were using those scenes more to do stuff with David, and still didn't do that much with David anyway. And I don't know, I just really wanted there to be more of a point to them being here, and it feels to me, now that the story's done, that they're there more out of obligation to, because Chloe is the main character, so, like, you have to have something with these guys because it's her parents. Like, what, you can't just ignore that she has parents, like, that kind of thing. So little let down by that, but I do like that they at least tried a couple things with them, and I felt like this last scene was making more of an effort than the previous ones with that stuff. But so I'm trying to think where we go from that scene. Is that when, I think that's when Chloe goes to fix the truck.
Yep,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think so.
After that.
Yeah, which I actually liked that scene quite a bit. I thought it was really adorable watching her be her science-y self, that, you know, we know that she kind of, like, drops that from, like, here on, like, she kind of loses that part of herself in a way. But I did like that they spent some time where she was on her own, you know, focusing on fixing a thing, doing a good thing. And I like that we get that, the metaphor of the truck kind of coming full circle and being, like, you know, a metaphor for her as a person, and or her, you know, any of her relationships with these different characters, of being like, they're broken and they've got a lot of problems, but, you know, some care, some effort, some work, we can get it back up and running again. And it was, weirdly, I think for me, it was the emotional high of the episode to see her so pleased about having fixed this truck. Like, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, that probably was the emotional, like, high point for me for this episode, was just, I felt a lot of good, warm, fuzzy feelings seeing this character going through all this shit, and, like, feeling proud and happy that she did this thing that she went out to do and was able to do it. Like, I don't know, it was just really nice.
It was a good success moment that didn't have a huge, immediate, or down the road drawback, I feel like.
Right, yeah, it was just this simple little life moment, but, like, Chloe's character hasn't been able to have any of those, I think, is maybe part of it. So maybe that's part of why it was so meaningful to me. And maybe because it was just her on her own, and there wasn't another character there that I know, you know, hurts her, or that I know that she hurts them, or mutually they hurt each other, whatever. There wasn't any of that. It's like, this is her truck. Like, we know that she has this truck later, and now we have this context that, like, she found this truck broken and abandoned, and she put this effort into fixing it, and then made it her own. And, like, I don't know, there's some nice meaning to that, I think. I did feel like this, like, her kind of test driving it and zooming around was, like, longer than it needed to be. I actually got a little bit bored because I was like, okay, we get it, the truck works. But and then I think I'm trying to remember where we go from there. I don't actually remember. Do we just straight up go into?
Yeah, Rachel shows up, and they chat for
okay.
like just like a minute, and then they meet with Frank and Damon.
Yeah. And then that the climax of the story, except not actually the climax of the story, but kind of, yes, the climax of the story. This episode has two climaxes, so, which is fine. Well, I mean, I don't think it's actually fine, but that's the premise of having two climaxes in your final episode is fine. I'm just not a fan of how it played out. But so Koethe, how did you feel about this confrontation in the junkyard scene?
You know, I liked it. I haven't gone back and looked at any alternatives you can choose. I don't know if there is any real alternative dialogue or alternative outcome. And the reason I wonder about that is because I realize it's a very realistic thing to say after an event like this, to say things like what Chloe keeps saying of, if I'd have acted faster, if I could have done more. I think the only reason that stood out to me is in a game so heavily rooted on making your own choices. That stood out to me the whole time. I was like, could I have was there something I missed where like I could have not outright stopped her from getting stabbed, but maybe made it so she got, shot in the arm. So there was some different outcome of events somewhere in there, and that it would have gone from, I should have just stayed still and done nothing. I'm the reason she got insert whatever happened here. And I wondered about that. I'm not sure, maybe there is, but it didn't stand out to me as one where there was an obvious polarizing choice moment where I could interact. And I kind of wanted one there, I guess, even if it was ultimately futile and we had the same general outcome either way.
Yeah. So what'd you think about that scene, Riley?
So, well, first, about the scene where she was fixing the truck, I just want to say that when she like got the manual and kind of had the page like pasted up on the hood of the truck, I was like so excited that I was gonna have to solve this great like puzzle where you have to like follow along. So I kept zooming in to read the page and be like, okay, first this thing, and then try and do something with it, and then I like quickly realized that all you had to do was just like click on everything.
The tool.
So I was a little bit disappointed with it.
Yeah.
Okay, back to the serious scene. So I really liked this scene. I loved how Rachel flew off the handle. I thought that was it was very in character for her. It was pretty funny how she was able to shove a grown man onto the ground with a little 15-year-old self-shove, but smacking him with the board, and then she got stabbed, and I was like, oh yeah, this is really exciting and this is really cool. So that particular scene I quite liked. I guess I'll also say that it was kind of the end of the game for me in a way also. I kind of felt like as soon as we got to the hospital, like I don't know, as soon as we got to the hospital, not knowing what the rest of the game was going to hold, I got this sense of like, well, the fun's over. I did really like the junkyard confrontation scene.
Yeah, I like that it had that this tension to it the whole time, because you've seen how Damon reacts to people. Like you know that he is a person that is not afraid to use force. And I did like that Rachel is actually the one that escalates things. And one of the reasons why I like this is because they built up to it really well. Because across the first two episodes, you see multiple instances of her character kind of losing it for a moment, like breaking a bottles, breaking a table. I think there's some
knocking
other
over
thing.
a garbage can that's on fire and happens to set the whole forest on fire.
That's the one. Like maybe the most little things like that. Yeah. So I really liked that they definitely built up to her having those tendencies. And then that does end up, resulting in some physical violence. But while I liked that moment, I still kind of I was hoping for more from this scene. Like I was hoping for there to be more, I guess, connective tissue between it and like other things that had happened. Like I honestly was expecting it to be tied to like Damon losing all that money, because that seemed like such a big motivator for him. Like that's supposed to be the motivation for like why he's doing all of these things, because he's so desperate for this money that he's lost from that fire. And so it was kind of unfulfilling to me that like, no, the actual reason he confronts them and attacks them is because they're asking about Rachel's mom, I guess. I'm thinking about it, I'm a little unclear.
I think that was why, because Frank mentioned to him that they'd been asking about Sarah, and then, based on what we know that happens later with Rachel's dad and the deal that they have, he's probably like, paranoid about it or something.
Yeah, that's probably it. But one thing I didn't like about the scene was that it does feel like the climax of the story, and yet Chloe doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it does feel like she
bothers
plays a
me a
very
lot.
minimal role, and that
Yeah.
was, I felt, odd.
Yep, which is, in my opinion, a recurring trend of this episode. But so we go from that scene to the hospital. I did like the little kind of montage that they did with the hospital and showing like the different people kind of showing up and leaving
Yeah, that
and
was
stuff
cool.
like that. Yeah, and I liked having that conversation with Rachel's dad, and I liked, Chloe's character being in this very realistically like distraught uh position, like her. I remember her like they made her eyes look very like she'd been, very distraught and crying, and
They
her
did a
voice
good job
acting.
with the
Yeah,
eye design, especially right there. I like that a lot.
yeah, like I definitely got the sense that she's just seen this like horrible shit go down and like had to get this person to a hospital and they don't know if she's gonna live and like all that. Like I did feel that emotional weight coming from her character. Um, it was a little weird to me to have James kind of, I don't know, something about that conversation with her and James was a little weird, and I think in retrospect it has more to do with the overall theme of the episode about truth versus lies, and that scene kind of being kind of weird in relation to that to me. But um, I don't know. I don't know if either of you guys have any thoughts on that conversation with James or not. But
Not too much.
yeah,
It's interesting, actually. For me, I felt that the hospital sequence was, at least personally, was more intense and more emotional than the actual fight sequence in the junkyard. And I guess the reason being that we kind of know how, at least to an extent, how that goes, just based on the fact that 3 of these characters exist in the next game and one of them doesn't. And I was like, well, one way or another, Damon doesn't make it out of episode 3. From that moment, I was like, yeah, he's gone. He's not just going to fade into obscurity.
Yeah, that was weird. And
I felt like when we got to the hospital, it was more of a I felt like it was more, we kind of know the general gist of it. It was more interesting to see the character direction they personally were taking, as opposed to these large plot stroke type things. So I felt that was more emotional in general. That was probably one of my favorite environments in the game in general, just because it felt very different from a lot of the places we'd been to before.
Yeah. I both liked and didn't like that we get to go down the hall and talk to Mikey and Drew's dad. I actually did like that little conversation bit there. It helps kind of contextualize, that family situation and whatnot. And then you can go into the hospital room and talk with them, but I felt very, I guess, frustrated or unsatisfied by like how little you can do with them, knowing like I knew like this is the last time we're gonna get to hang out with these characters, and like in my game, Drew got his leg broken, so he was in the hospital bed, and I go, I see Steph and Mikey with the D&D, and I'm like so like keyed up, like, yeah, we're gonna get to play D&D one last time, and Jenny's like, oh, but Rachel's in her hospital bed, like, you can't waste time like playing, and I'm like, yeah, but she's like just recovering from surgery, like Chloe's been sitting here waiting this whole time, like what else is she gonna do? So like I really expected that I was gonna get to play D&D with these guys, and then like you go and talk to them, and Steph says like one sentence, and that's it.
Yeah, and you can't even talk to them.
And that was my last. Yeah, and you can't talk to them, and like that's my last interaction with those characters through the whole game. I was like, I knew it was going to be my last interaction with them, and I felt so frustrated. I'm like, okay, so then I go and talk to Drew, and I find out that you can steal his pudding, and I'm like, I'm not gonna steal this poor guy's pudding. Like, what the fuck?
I went through that just to see what it was like, and it was the most like. That was just a weird sequence in general.
Yeah,
it feels like the most like awful, monstrous thing you can do at that time.
Yeah.
It's really, it feels like a weird sequence.
Yeah, and it also it like has this like juvenile sense to it that like for me took away from all the other things going on.
Any of the urgency in that sequence.
Yeah,
like,
it was
at
like,
all.
whereas like if you sit down and play D&D, like yeah, that's going to take away the urgency from other things, but in a more, I don't know, like a more organic way. Like they're trying to distract themselves from all of this other shit that's going on. Whereas like arguing with this poor guy who got his leg broken, kind of because you didn't do any, like, I don't know, it's just, and to make it just felt like we need another backtalk sequence in here. What are we gonna do?
Yeah,
And it just,
yeah.
and it just kind of solidified this feeling I have about the backtalk sequences, which is that they more or less break down to Chloe being an asshole to someone else, usually not for a good reason. I'm just like, why? This is the final episode. Like, we're supposed to see her character having experienced some growth, and instead she's like talking out of this poor guy's like one like nice thing for the day or something.
His
like
charity
oh, man.
pudding at that point.
Right? Yeah. Well, and that if you do the backtalk sequence, like the scene ends with Chloe being like, "Yeah, okay, you know what? We'll compromise. I'll give you half of it," and then she just eats the whole thing in front of him anyway. And it's like, what? Why?
I'm glad
It's
I
so
didn't see that. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it really, like, it did not. It was not. I don't think it was.
They try to reel it back by having him be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you're all right, Chloe," about it, but at the same time, it's like,
Yeah.
I still don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah.
Like, it felt unusual.
You know, on that note, on that trying to reel it back thing, there were a few instances in this episode where it felt like they were trying to do that with things from the first two episodes, where like maybe, I don't know if these were added in after the fact because people complained, like people like me complained, but because they do that with the pudding thing, like right then and there. But then there's also those texts with Victoria where she calls, where she calls people out on like, you know, I like got drugged and passed out in front of everyone and no one fucking did anything.
You all just left me there.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
as soon as I read that, I was like, that
100%
has to just be them like, no, look, see, fans, we got it. We got you covered. That was all I thought when I saw it. It was like, that has to be in response to fans.
And then within the same sequence in the hospital, you can run into that weird couple that you stole wine from in the first episode, and they like try to make it out like, oh, it was actually a good thing that we stole their wine from them because the one chick is pregnant. I'm like, why the fuck are these characters even here? Like they're literally there just so you can like try to justify that it was okay that we did this dumb stupid thing in the first episode. Like, why? Like, what are you just that weird dumb thing happened. Let's just move on. Like, you don't need to like try and convince us that it was good. Like, no. Just but I'm trying to think of what else there was, because there are like a lot of little bits in this scene. There was when you're in the hallway, I think near Mikey and Drew's room that they're in, there's like an open door, and you can listen to two different conversations depending on choices you've made regarding Nathan. Mm-hmm. I'll ask you, Riley, what conversation did you get, and what did you think of it?
I got a conversation between, I think her name was Samantha, right, and Nathan, and I had like no idea what they were talking about. I'm like, okay, who's hurt? Like, it sounded like someone like Nathan and like gotten Samantha hurt somehow or something. I don't know. I had no idea what was going on.
Okay, and what about you, Koethe?
I think I got the same conversation. And actually, when I very first started listening in on it, I very much thought that it was a situation where Nathan had gotten like angry and in a fit of rage had in some capacity hurt Samantha, because he's like, oh, I just didn't mean to. And she's like, no, it's my fault. I'm just always so clumsy. And I was like, Jesus, that sounds like an abusive relationship. Like, this sounds dark. And then it was like, oh no, she like tripped and he didn't catch her or something. I was like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't like
is that what happened? Yeah, I heard the same thing and I thought the same thing, but I guess I missed the part at the end.
Yeah, it ended up being like a more innocent, like he had not caught her from tripping out in front of traffic or some
traffic,
absent-minded thing. I thought it was all right. It was a bike. It was a bike.
Oh,
I think she got hit by a bike.
So for me, I actually got the other version of the conversation, which is Nathan's dad and a psychiatrist talking about Nathan. And Nathan's dad was basically like, no, he doesn't like this is a waste of time. Like my boy's too good for blah blah blah. He doesn't need this worthless kind of help. Blah blah blah. I don't really remember the details of it, and I think part of what is weird about this moment is no matter which conversation you get, you can't really quite pay attention to it because it's literally just background sound. Like, I feel like they should have at least showed subtitles or like made it a thing where you could go to the door and then hit a button to eavesdrop.
Yeah, to peek in and listen
to
like
actually,
you do on the first conversation.
Yeah, then you
Right.
can make sense of it.
Yeah, because usually they were pretty good about doing that with a number of things in this game and in the first one as well. And this one they don't. It's just like a thing that's literally like background sound. So like there's no subtitles, and so like if you miss part of it, you just miss part of it. Too bad. And it was like, it's kind of weird. And then similarly, in I think the same hallway, maybe even, there are two firefighters that are talking about how that huge forest fire that was going on just suddenly stopped, seemingly magically, and so guess we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's like that made me pretty annoyed. But
yeah, I mean, I think I heard people say that maybe it was because the fire was connected to Rachel and she got hurt and it went out, but I know they never made that explicit or anything. But
yeah,
it's kind of
I have seen some people theorize that. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Koethe?
That was actually as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, it's because she like passed out either from blood loss or the anesthetic or whatever. So like I felt that it was them trying to indicate that it was tied to Rachel. I liked them trying to tie it to Rachel, and I liked it being in that small context. The only thing I disliked was that was like the absolute last we ever heard of the fire.
Yeah.
Besides like an offhanded scene setup context from Chloe a little later on. Yeah. That's like the most we really hear about it. And it was like, that was such a huge deal in episode 1 and like all of episode 2. And then it seems like, oh, it's kind of that's done, whatever. And it was like, I like that they tried to tie it to Rachel. I just feel like I wish it had played like some thematic element just because of how much they hyped it up.
Yeah.
And it felt even, I know like in season 1, there were people who were upset that like some of the Native American symbolism didn't tie in more. It felt like the fire was even more like in your face. I mean, it literally was in your face the entire time. They text messages about it. They forced the camera onto it a whole bunch. The whole first ending episode is focusing on it. And it was like, oh, it was just to show that, just to re-tease what you already got in that first episode way more aggressively, that Rachel's potentially tied to the fire. That's it, guys. Bye. And like that felt a little like, oh, I like, okay, cool. But was that it? Just a set piece? I guess it was, but that was a little bit of like I liked it at the moment because I think I assumed there was going to be more with it later on. And it was like, oh, the last set piece we go to is like the burnt version. I was like, oh, that's cool, I guess, but really no more fire. All right, cool.
Yep. Yeah.
One thing I was actually wondering if either of you had found in the hospital, there is over by I think it's the front office desk area, there's like a little letter from Sean Prescott saying he's going to be paying for whoever ends up in the hospitals, like all their hospital fees, and he wants to do it anonymously.
Yeah.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because I wasn't actually sure what that meant as far as Sean Prescott. Like, does that mean he isn't as big? Like, because it seemed like, at least based strictly on that, at least what I was aware of, they were trying to make it seem like he isn't that bad. Like, or he does have a good side, which seemed like a really unusual thing for them to try to frame about that character. Not in a bad way, just interesting. Yeah. Like, oh, that has interesting implications for that character.
Yeah, I saw that too. It seems a bit pointless. I think in a lot of cases it's great to make characters more well-rounded, but with Sean Prescott, we don't know, and we do lay eyes on him during this season. But he's not an important character in the plot. He's kind of this overarching guy in the background that we can have opinions about. It just seemed very strange to try to give him a little good side for no reason,
And especially because, at least when I was playing it, that was basically the last we ever heard of him. It was you get this mention of like he's bad, and then like he paid for all these guys' hospital bills, and you're like, wait, what? No, why though? Wait, Sean Prescott, no, and
Right.
he's just gone
Why?
forever. He disappears into the smoke, and he's gone. And
Yeah.
I don't know what his deal was. I want to know more about him now that I probably never will. And
Yeah.
it was cool, but at the same time, it's like, why then though? Like,
Yeah.
again, that seems like one of those ordering things that like maybe it would have been cool to have seen that. And I guess maybe I'm thinking of it in the context of seeing what happens later on in season 1. But I feel like knowing that, it feels like this is one good thing arbitrarily sandwiched between all this bad stuff. And you're like, I don't really know how to feel about that or what that means, or if maybe they're just trying to say that just because someone does one really, really exceptionally, generous thing doesn't make them a good person. I don't really know what their message was with that, because it didn't feel like it was the same as it is with David, where people who are assholes can still be like genuinely kind people who are just misunderstood and troubled, and they have shit ways of dealing with it. It felt like it was different than that. So I don't know. That was interesting and odd, I thought.
Yep. There are a number of things like that for me in this episode. There actually is one last part of that whole like hospital sequence I forgot to touch on before, but I was talking about playing D&D with Steph and Mikey, and I found out after I was done with the episode that apparently you can.
Yeah.
I think it's
went back
bugged.
and
At least when
watched
I did it, it was bugged, because when I completed the episode, 0% of people had fucking
Yeah,
gotten
that's
it.
what it said for
And
me
I was like,
too.
wow.
And
I was like, wait, what?
what?
You could do it? Because I went around Mikey for like 5 minutes. I was like hitting him from every angle. I was like, I couldn't even talk to him. I was like, oh, that's horrendously misleading. Why would they even put the D&D set piece in there if you couldn't do anything with it?
Yeah. So what I've heard from people, and I still haven't looked into it enough to like even look up video footage of it, because at this point I'm just like, it should just been there. Like I should just been able to play it, honestly. But apparently, if Mikey is the one that's in the hospital bed, it is a thing that you can do in like as an alternate to the back talk sequence with the pudding to like help him feel better. And I'm like, why could you not just do it anyway? Like
That's
he's
so
there
weird.
either way.
Yeah.
He's like I could see it. I could see the D&D sequence playing out differently depending on whether he's in the hospital bed or not. Like maybe his mood is different, but like why would you put it there, but like block off like at least 50% of people
like
from seeing it?
The physical set piece is still there regardless, even if he's not in the bed. Him and Steph are sitting there playing it at the table, and there's not inviting you to play, and that's super weird, actually.
It is, it is weird, and it's annoying, and it's
like it's so fun. I mean, it's like such a big thing. Like it's totally like I didn't even do the pudding thing, but I'm sure it doesn't even compare.
Those two characters, Steph and Mikey, I think are one of the best things that this prequel brought to the table, and to not get to experience any kind of resolution with either of them was like, I guess I would say like emotional constipation for me, like just very frustrating. But anyway, I just want to make sure I brought that up because that to me is like kind of a big deal for me personally.
Yeah, I went back and watched it on YouTube and someone else playing that scene, and it was really good. It actually had like, you didn't go back and watch it.
No, I haven't yet.
It's
but it sounds
good.
like maybe I should.
It has that emotional resolution I think that you're looking for. So I would go watch that later or go back and play it.
Yeah, well, I can't go back and play it because you have to have made some choice in like the previous episode. So like that's which I'm not gonna do just for that. But yeah, I'll probably try looking it up.
Yeah, it was a good scene, I think.
Yeah, that's good to know, but it's also that much more frustrating that like they arbitrarily blocked it off from like at least 50% of people who play it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it was just maybe, like you said, Koethe, that it was maybe just glitched because 0% of players experienced it when I played it.
Because that struck me as that was the only choice that was 0%. Even compared to things like, did you kill Pompidou and stuff like that? Like, at least some small percent of people do those things. Like this was like outright like no one could.
And to be fair, this game has experienced more bugginess with the choice-based things than the first game did. I've actually seen and heard of, and actually we experienced it myself, where we played through for our me and Jenny when we were playing for our live stream stuff. On our second episode, we were getting reactions to choices that I hadn't made. Like we were getting incorrect Like things in the game like there was like one or two instances of it where someone said something or there was some reaction to something that was as if I had made a choice that I hadn't made. And we were like confused by that. And I looked it up, and it's a thing that other people have run into. Apparently the big thing that triggers it is if you have multiple save files. Sometimes the game doesn't check the right save file for the choices. And I'm like, when that's the main mechanic of the game, wouldn't you want to make sure that works properly? Just a thought.
Especially I would if you're probably offer save file and multiple saves. Like test it maybe. Don't just throw it out.
Yeah. So that's kind of weird, but so we go from that scene, and I think after that we actually have that conversation with Rachel in the hospital bed, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I honestly don't remember too much about this scene because at this point I think I was where you were feeling, Riley, where I was like, yeah, like I'm not sure I'm gonna like whatever is left after this. I felt like we should have had a whole like catharsis thing in the hospital and like somehow resolved. Well, I guess I could get into that later, but I think part of why I didn't care much for that scene in the hospital was because Jenny had brought it up in the last Chloe and Rachel scene. I was that much more like aware of Rachel doing the whole like, so are you going to do this or and this and this? You're going to do these things, right? You can do these things. You got this. You are going to do these things, right? So I was like really self-aware of that during the scene, and I just couldn't like get into like the emotional place that I feel like they wanted you to be at, where you're like, oh, poor Rachel, she just got stabbed and is like trying to recover, and like these two women are trying to recover from this like really messed up, like, she got stabbed. The knife went clean through her entire arm. Like, that's fucked up. Like, but no, instead of like trying to like, maybe we shouldn't get involved with this shit. Instead, Rachel's like, no, you should go break into my district attorney father's office to get more info so that you can keep diving deeper into this rabbit hole. I mean, I got stabbed, but I'm sure you'll be fine.
You still got two good working arms.
Right. Like, oh my gosh. So like, I just was really not feeling that scene, and I honestly just don't remember it that well because I was just so frustrated that like after all of this stuff that's happened in these previous two episodes and the repeated warnings, like I feel like it coming from James means that maybe we're in a bad spot where James is even like, you really probably shouldn't push this stuff, and my daughter's really stubborn and she's always going to try and get what she wants. Like, that's just how she is. And like Chloe just not even considering that possibility and just be like, yep, I'm going to just do whatever you're telling me to do. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. No, even though I'm so emotionally distraught from this conversation I just had with your dad, like I'm not going to spend any time reflecting on my decisions. I'm just going to keep going with it. Just like, okay. But I don't know if either of you two have anything to input on that scene, but
I think that was where oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. It's okay.
I was going to say, I think that was where Rachel's more manipulative tendency kind of really started to stand out to me, because it was like, holy shit, this terrible thing just happened. And she was like, I think I still really want it though. So
yeah,
chop here, Chloe.
Yeah.
This is a very small petty thing, and it's more of a video game design thing. But as soon as we went into the hospital room, the first thing that jumped out to me was, that's not typically the kind of hospital gown you would get after you had to go into surgery. And B, why is Rachel not being rendered underneath the covers?
Which, I knew you were going to say that.
Because we thought small. The same thing. But like, I was like, she really should, like, especially if you're having surgery, they would never give you like a full like elastic waistbanded outfit. They give you that thing that's easy to open up and tear off if they have to. If you start like, internal bleeding to death or some horrible thing. They have no idea what other trauma her body underwent. And so that was unusual. And the covers thing is just video games.
Somebody give that girl a blanket.
That seems like she just. It sounded like she was under anesthetic. I was like, they would definitely have at least one of those little cheapo hospital blankets thrown over. And then they wouldn't have even had to have made the hard choice to render her in the wrong gown. I don't know. That just stood out as like Just put her torso wiggling about above the covers. It'll be fine.
The pajamas were cute, though. You have to admit
they
really
were.
Cute.
They super were actually. And I wonder almost if that was the reasoning they did it, is to make her seem more like a little kid and innocent, so it was easier for you to maybe avoid.
Yeah, that would line up with a lot of what I felt like they were trying to do with this episode, so maybe that was it. I don't know.
Because I feel like she did definitely look like it was like little kids' pajamas, and like I think they had like a little bit like less makeup on her at that point.
Yeah,
they were
she
clearly trying to make her
earring.
look more like young childy there. And I think that plays in nicely to like that idea of like, oh, she's asking you again, like, I still really want this thing. I'm so innocent, give in. And I think that kind of could be a very intentional direction they went with that then.
Did you have any thoughts on that bit?
Kind of about Rachel getting stabbed. So when she got stabbed, I thought it was really unexpected. I'm like, oh, that was cool, but kind of after we get to the hospital and stuff, I kind of wish she'd gotten like a bit less stabbed, because like it takes her out of the rest of the episode, and that so that to me, as soon as we landed in the hospital and they said it was really bad, I'm like, oh, it like I said before, it's like, oh, the fun's over now, because she couldn't be in the rest of the episode, and I don't really know why they had to do that. I mean, especially because she got stabbed in the arm, like it. I mean, I don't know. I guess it could be really bad. They said they almost hit some big artery or something, but I don't know. It seems like she could have got stabbed somewhere that was like a bit more obviously like life-threatening than like the arm, to make it kind of hit home a little more. But other than that, the whole rest of the game for me was kind of disappointing. Starting with the hospital, but especially that the scene with Rachel, and then she sends you on this quest, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna go somewhere without Rachel and do something for this plot, which is kind of contrived as it is. So
which brings us to the last scene that we get between William and David, which is not William and David. Fuck. Those are her two parental figures, the paternal figure, father figures, whatever. The scene by the road with Chloe and William.
I think she goes to the DA's office first, actually.
Oh yeah, you're right.
She's doing that on the way to the mill.
For some reason my brain put that before the DA's office, but yeah, you are right.
Although as much as I kind of don't want to talk about this scene because
we have to talk about this scene.
Yeah,
this scene makes me so salty. So we get the scene in the district attorney's office where Chloe breaks in. I don't know if she necessarily breaks into the Amber household or just like lets herself in. I wasn't paying attention at that moment, but she goes into their house uninvited. There's no one there, so like she sneaks into this house. She breaks into Chloe breaks into Rachel's dad's office using the security code that Rachel gave her, and then starts rifling through all of his things to dig up dirt on him and dig up dirt on what he is keeping from Rachel. And ultimately what this culminates in is her finding out that, yes, he has been hiding more. There's more to the story than what he told us earlier. He is keeping more secrets from us. And she discovers that he has like a burner phone or like a second phone or whatever you want to call it, where he has been in contact with Damon about Sarah, apparently about making Sarah go away, I guess. And I guess the kind of end result is that Chloe ends up pretending to be James, texting Damon, and then committing illegal acts in James's name. Just
so many bad decisions.
And like something that really bothers me about that whole sequence is Chloe just does it. She doesn't question it. She doesn't consider like how dumb a decision this is. Like she doesn't think about what she's doing. She just does it. And I'm just like, really? Like this is, I get that she's all like rebelling against the law and whatever and drawing graffiti, but like drawing graffiti and like trying to go to a concert that she's not supposed to be at, like those are very different from basically getting a guy murdered by accusing him of being a snitch and burning evidence and breaking into a district attorney's
accessory
office.
To murder and a pretty large felony.
Right.
Destroy
which
privatized police evidence.
Might I point out, she faces no consequences for, by the way. which is also a thing that bothers me. But as it turns out, someone else gets to face consequences for her doing this. Because Elliot shows up, and this character that has been like looming in the background that we knew there was going to be something with this character, because why else is he there? What's the point to him? Like, is he just, like another, like Chloe's version of Warren, and he's just going to be this thing in the background that just doesn't do anything? But no, they definitely had some kind of purpose with this character, and I was very not happy with the execution of what they did with his character. I don't even know where to begin with this
I
scene.
know.
Well, we'll start with you, Koethe. What did you feel about just the whole like district attorney office scene, like as a whole, but also about Elliot in particular?
Specifically the district attorney office sequence. The very first thing that stood out to me, I didn't take a whole lot of notes on the gameplay, but the one note I have for like that entire sequence was just close the fucking door. I don't know if you guys caught it. She leaves the front door wide open. And I legitimately thought that I had missed something, and I had to go online and quickly watch up to that point in someone else's playthrough to confirm that I had not missed, like, I was like, oh, I must have, like, walked in here intentionally, and I forgot to close the door, and that's going to be this huge problem later on. Because, like, old man Smithers next door is going to be like, oh, Mr. Amber, what are you left your door open? Is everything all right? And then Chloe's going to be, no, but it was just, you can't close the door. You just can't do it. So that was weird. I thought that was, and I get why they did it, kind of, so Elliot could get in, but, like, why couldn't Elliot have just opened the door, come in through a window, and that seemed weird. So that was my first little issue with that. The actual gameplay portion of it, I thought it was probably one of the like best gameplay sequences, not story sequences, but just raw gameplay. I actually really, really liked the, I think the guy accepts anyone, which is a little less cool, but I liked the tension that I at least felt my very first playthrough of trying to convince Damon who the snitch was. And then similarly, when Elliot came in later, I really liked the emergency police phone call and trying to get the police to come without notifying Elliot of what you were doing. I thought those were, as far as gameplay was concerned, I liked those a lot. With Elliot, I have mixed feelings about Elliot. I have mixed feelings about the way they rapidly escalated him from like 3 to 11. As far as I really liked the direction they went with it at first, and then it was like, oh, he's not stopping. Oh, geez, right. Elliot, no, stop. Like, it was one of those, like, I felt like, oh, this is genuinely some guy who's like, Jesus Christ, Elliot, like, get out. Like, I get it, you care, whatever, you're Mr. Nice Guy and all that, but like, buzz off. And then like he went super dark with it, and I was like, oh, that was. I like it in some respects because I like the idea of showing a character having that shift. I don't know if this was necessarily. I don't know what I would change about it if I could, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I felt unusual at parts.
Yeah.
Because it felt very suddenly like annoying, and then all of a sudden he was, abusive and aggressive and awful, as opposed to just a pain. And it was very quick. And it felt more like odd character writing quick as opposed to a complex character who has the ability to turn on you in a heartbeat kind of quick.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree with that. What about you, Riley? How did you feel about this whole bit?
Okay. So this scene, I mean, probably takes the cake for like the worst part of the episode for me.
Yeah, me too.
So, and the whole DA's office and everything. The environment was nice. The set was nice. The little snow globe thingy and a bunch of stuff. But okay, so my first big thing that I haven't heard other people say, but was like really obvious to me, is that you look at the computer and you see an email conversation between Sarah and James. And Chloe is trying to get in touch with Sarah. So to me, that's the information she's looking for. Take the email address, send the lady an email, and be on your way, right?
Right.
And this is before Chloe, I guess depending on what order you look at things. But for me, this was like before you find out that, Sarah might be kidnapped or anything might be wrong with her at all. So the fact that that was there, like, I just could not let go of that. I'm like, oh my God, like I could, like, having to go through all the motions of, like, especially burning the evidence and all that shit, like having to do that, knowing that she could have just like emailed her. It was horrible. And then the Elliot thing, real, like that to me was really, really my least favorite scene. And that's because we have this character who comes across as, like, mentally unstable, kind of off his rocker, all this. And he's also the only character, I believe, in the entire episode that says exactly what I'm thinking.
Yep.
And are you feeling me on that? I'm like,
Oh, yes.
I really, really want this to be said to Chloe. I really want this to come out in the episode, not out of Elliot's mouth, and not this the only time during the episode. This to me was like, he was saying stuff that I thought was like sort of the big themes for the entire game, that were going to be discussed in detail and given a lot of thought to, especially at the very end in the montage, everything. But this was the only thing we get of it, and it's from fucking Elliot. And I was just like, oh, so upset about that.
Yes. Yes. This, man. This whole thing with Elliot is easily my least favorite scene in the whole, like, Before the Storm story. There are like a couple other scenes that I think are also, like, really bad in a, like the wine stealing scene. Just like, that just wasn't a good scene. Like, it was just weird and silly and dumb to me. But, like, this scene is weird and takes away from, like, it, like, knocks the wind out of so much of what the story is built up to.
Yes.
Like, I feel like something went wrong with this scene, and I don't know if it's they, like, did an about face, like they built up all of these ideas about the relationship between Chloe and Rachel, and then, like, changed their minds because, no, actually, we want to have an optimistic end to this story because look at how cute they are together. Like, I can't figure out, like, how, like, I can't really think of a version of this scene, of this confrontation with Elliot, that would have worked well for me. Like, even if he hadn't gone quite as crazy, if this was still the only instance of the episode where Chloe was confronted with these questions from this character, it's mainly because it's from this character we don't know. Like, why should we care or put any stock in what this character says? Because we don't know him. Like, why? Which this is really a big element of a lot of why I don't like this episode, is we're being told all of these things from all these characters that haven't really been in the story the entire rest of the time, and then they show up here at the end and they, like, are feeding all of these, like, thoughts and ideas and opinions to Chloe's character, and she just kind of, I don't know, like, rolls by it and doesn't really reflect on it or anything. But I think a big issue I have with the Elliot thing in particular is that, like you said, it's the only instance in the whole episode where this very legitimate concept that the previous episodes have, like, alluded to and been building towards, the only example where it gets brought up. And to me, that was supposed to be, like, the emotional, like, confrontation of the whole story.
Yeah.
Was Chloe having to come to terms with that Rachel isn't this perfect person, and her having to deal with that kind of ambiguous line between where passion can be good or bad, whether she's being, the whole, like, imagery with the fire and being blinded by beauty versus being blinded by darkness, whatever. All of these themes that the first two episodes alluded to and built up toward and developed, and it's just, like, kind of dumped on us by this character who just is acting super irrational, a character we don't even know. Like, just his sole purpose was just to be there to say bad things about Rachel and Chloe, and that's it. And Chloe doesn't even, like, have that conversation with him because he just goes flying off the handle so quickly, and then it becomes not even about that conversation. It becomes about her trying to escape. And that is already kind of weird. And I know Jenny particularly did not like the mechanic of using backtalk for 911 because I'm trying to remember how she put it. I believe she said basically that it's trivializing a very serious thing that happens in real life where you have to call 911 to protect yourself, and they almost kind of play it up in a humorous way because that's how all the backtalk sequences work. And it was just weird. And like, I've had to call 911 before when I was a kid to like protect my family because someone had broken in. And like, I've actually had to do that twice because I grew up in such a great neighborhood. And like, it's not, it's not a pleasant experience. And it's like weird seeing that turned into this like very video gamey, like kind of almost lighthearted manner of going about it when it's like not that. It shouldn't be presented as that to me. Um, but that's kind of more of a footnote, I guess, to that scene. But the big thing is, like you said, Riley, like it really frustrates me that these very legitimate questions and themes and concepts about the relationship between Chloe and Rachel, which I thought was the most important part about this story, the core central thing, just like the original game was about Max and Chloe. I thought that's what this story was going to be about, and then that scene happened, and like by the time that scene ended and there's no discussion, there's no reflection, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen after this, but I'm probably not going to like it too much because that was what I was waiting for, and that sucked.
Yeah, and it's not like we made it up. Like it was
right.
It was so they were making it so overt in the first 2 episodes. That's what the story was about. They kept bringing it up. All the dream sequences with William, everything was about whether or not you could trust Rachel. Rachel was fire. All this stuff, and it's not like we're making it up. Like of course we were expecting that.
Yeah, and I've had multiple people bring up this concern to me that for them, they felt like this scene like almost insulted them for thinking those things.
That's how I felt
like,
too.
How dare you think badly of Rachel? She's a sweet, innocent angel, and how dare you think these things? Because look at this guy. He thinks those things, and look how crazy he is. And it's just like, ouch. Like, really? Like, that's it? That's the only character who's going to have these thoughts and these opinions expressed? And I don't know, like it does almost feel like they like changed their mind about it and we're like, no, actually we don't want you to be thinking these critical thoughts. You should just be doing what Rachel says because you love her so much. And oh man. Yeah. Really did not like that scene, suffice it to say.
Yeah.
But so after that happens and Chloe magically avoids the police and lets Elliot get, I guess not arrested, but whatever. Elliot ends up getting expelled because of it, I assume is the implication. But she just magically gets out of that situation scot-free, no problems apparently, and ends up heading down to the old mill. And we get one last conversation with William by the side of the road, which is the kind of conversation that up until now she's been having within her dreams, but she is definitely awake during this one, which makes it notably different and weird to me. So Koethe, what did you think about that whole sequence, like her driving on the road and then having this talk with William?
I thought it was a pretty neat sequence. I liked, to me, the way I kind of interpreted it was, throughout the entire game, you have these moments where she kind of goes off and sits on her own. They're the reflective moments. When she's in those sequences, though, she's always speaking in a like a fourth wall break sort of way. She's like, "What do you do when your whole life is upside down?" She's talking to a entity, and it's up until this point, it's very much like she's narrating to the audience. And I at least personally felt like from that moment onward, I looked back at those and I was like, oh, okay, the whole time she's talking to this idea of her father being there.
That's a
not
good idea,
necessarily
actually.
a real ghost of her dad or a hallucination, but like, she says to Rachel, when I talk to him, and I think it's kind of how people talk to people they miss even when they aren't there. You talk to yourself even. And I felt like it was an embodiment of that. I felt like that in combination with the dream sequence earlier it was a neat way I felt to paint this like really, really, really genuinely, I felt believable and extremely sad version of someone who just misses this person in their life. This person, someone who misses their father, because it didn't seem like it was done in a especially dramatic way. Like, oh, surprise, there's William in real life. It was like, no, she's used to it. She's very much, this is just the way it is for her. And it was like, oh, that like, the fact that this isn't new to her, that she's always talking to her dad as if he was there because she wishes he was, I felt was like a really believable kind of tragic thing for the character to go through. So I liked that a lot.
I do like that interpretation of that because that is definitely not an idea that came to me at all. Like I had not. To me, it was just basically like it felt very sudden. Like you're right that like within that
Absolutely,
scene,
absolutely.
like
And
she's acting as if she's done this before.
yeah,
And I
and to
had
the
not.
audience, like, oh, surprise, William.
Yeah,
And I think an element of that is a shortcoming of the way they approached introducing him. And I don't know, again, I don't know how the hell I would do it
yeah,
differently, but I think there probably would be a way to make it a little bit clearer that this isn't supposed to be like a like when Max sees the deer, the ghost deer in the first
yeah,
game, that is something that's clearly supposed to be Max. Like, did I just see something? That it's supposed to be like it's a weird thing of
right.
like it's supposed to be supernatural and odd. Whereas
Hmm.
I didn't get the feeling that William being there was supposed to be supernatural at all.
Yeah,
And I feel like they, especially in the context of Life is Strange, could have introduced that in a slightly more understandable way.
yeah. Yeah, I do like that as an idea, what you brought up there. I will definitely be thinking about that the next time I see this game played through. Those conversations that she has with herself, because I do actually like that a lot as a concept. And if that is actually what they were intending, I feel like something got maybe missed in how they presented it or like how he entered the scene. Like I feel like they could have presented things in a way that made it more clear that if that was the intention, that was the
Yeah,
intention.
absolutely.
Like somehow referencing that they've had these conversations before, like when she smokes her cigarettes out and behind the school or whatever. Like something to recontextualize those moments that she's had on her own, that she's been kind of imagining talking to her dad. Like that could have actually been have much more emotional weight for me if they had conveyed that, assuming that is that the intent was. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
could see that making sense, especially since she does mention to Rachel that she has been having those kinds of conversations in her head, because she mentions that in the scene in Rachel's room. But what I did end up getting from that scene when I played through it, and I still kind of do get this even if I'm interpreting it that way, is it was almost like a way to write off the potentially supernatural things that they had set up with the previous dream sequences, which isn't really the case in the actual dream she has in this episode. But in the first two episodes, elements of her dreams are prophetic. They actually predict things. They like predict things that are going to happen in the future. Um, because I know we've talked about this before, like I really felt convinced that there was something to that there was some intent going on there. And for me, seeing the scene with William almost felt like them being like, by the way, there wasn't actually anything weird or supernatural going on with those dream sequences or these conversations he's having with William. It's
Hmm.
just a thing that she's doing, like just
Yeah,
in her own
yeah.
mind. And so I ended up feeling in the moment, especially, I felt really disappointed by that. Um, but also something that frustrated me was the actual conversation that she has with William didn't it wasn't what I was hoping for. Like it was just reiterating the same themes that the episode had been trying so hard to like drill into our heads of like, do you tell the truth or do you lie? Like which is the better way of protecting someone or keeping someone happy or whatever. And it felt like oddly forced to me here because I'm like, why
Yeah.
would Chloe suddenly be questioning whether or not her dad was honest to her? Like, what reason does she have? Like, what evidence is there for her to think that he lied to her about something important, like that she all of a sudden would be concerned about? Whereas what the actual story is about, or what it had been about, was is Rachel lying to me? Is Rachel being
Yeah, is
fully
Rachel
honest with
good or is
me?
Rachel bad?
Hmm.
Yeah, and I what I really was hoping for with this episode was that she would have that conversation with William, because effectively she'd be having that conversation with herself, and it could be this interesting like alternate version to what the first game did, where Max literally has a conversation with herself within her head, questioning her own actions and her own participation in the things that are going on. And it wasn't that. We do still kind of get one of those, because I mean they definitely didn't succeed at that with Elliot, I don't think. We do kind of get one of those later, but it I was really expecting it to be with William. Like even if all the dream stuff aside, like I really wanted there to be this more satisfying like intro introspective conversation about Chloe's relationship with Rachel and processing the good and the bad elements of it. Because that to me was like the whole like core concept of what made the story have weight to it in the first place. But yeah, so instead of that, we have this conversation about, you know, how would I know if I ever lied to you? I'm already dead. I'm just like, oh, okay. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts about this scene, Riley?
Yeah, kind of similar. Like it seemed sort of out of place. What they were talking about, very different than what they had been talking about in all of the sequences we'd seen them talking kind of up until then. I was like, I thought maybe I had like missed something. I'm like, what? You know, why does she, like you said, like why does she think that William lied to her about something? I kind of thought about it later and thought maybe she's kind of realizing that that it's likely that if you have a relationship with someone that you think is wonderful, that there is at least some crack in it, and maybe she's you know, maybe because I think that it was kind of clear that she idolized her father to a degree in the relationship that she had with him, so she might just be kind of questioning whether or not that was fair, you know, or how she might feel about him if he were still alive, and maybe something would come out. But I also want to say, because I did see a lot of people thinking that she was like hallucinating or something. I think you mentioned this in your blog post, Desma, about maybe she had a mental illness or hallucinating or something. But I didn't get that at all, because and maybe this is just me, but you know, I've had conversations like that a lot, and I don't have, you know, I'm not hallucinating. It's just
Right.
in therapy, I think they kind of can sometimes refer to it as an empty chair exercise, where you have a very, you know, intense conversation with somebody, and it really feels like they're there. And when you're needing to have kind of a catharsis or whatever, it's fine. I mean, you'd be surprised if you haven't tried it, like how much of a response you get from somebody, even if they're not there, and you're just kind of making them up in your head. So to me, that felt really natural. You know, I was like, oh, she's talking to her dad, but of course he's not really there, and it's not weird, especially that it's not weird.
Yeah, no, I actually can relate with that as a concept because I have had those before with people that I've had conflicts with in particular, when I'm trying to process how to go about that stuff. So I can definitely relate with that. I think for me, part of it is was the presentation of it, maybe, that it wasn't consistent with the previous times that it had happened. Which again, like Koethe alluded to, they could have maybe transitioned into it better. Like if she started that scene, which I guess she does start that scene kind of having that introspective, like thinking to herself thing, and then William kind of shows up. But yeah, I don't know. I guess just the way that it was presented just didn't connect maybe what they were intending to for me personally. So it just ended up kind of frustrating me. But yeah, no, those are definitely some good thoughts from both you guys on that scene. Kind of makes me feel a little more receptive to it than I originally was. So that's good, I think. But we do go from that scene to the second climax and the final climax of the story, and we revisit the old mill. Only now it's all like burned and ashy and stuff, which I did like visually, like as a visual metaphor or analogy or whatever. And I liked the kind of multiple references to the first game that were there. Because there was the deer head on the wall was still there, and the eyes were glowing blue. There was like a neon sign in the back that kept flashing between the words past and time, which I thought was really cool. This is a random dumb little detail that I liked a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like there might have been something else too that I'm forgetting about, but and then we go from that into like the actual climax scene, which was very not climactic. I
I was
feel
just
like
gonna say it doesn't really count.
yeah,
It's
like
anticlimactic.
it's weird. Because basically what happens is, yes, Damon has kidnapped Sarah for reasons that have to do with some deal that he's made with James, and like was James wanting her to get killed or like and then Damon like drugs her because she's a drug addict, and so I don't know. The implication I was picking up was, oh, he's going to kill her and make it look like she overdosed. And
Yeah,
like
that was the vibe I got too, which then
yeah,
was problematic when like the next sequence kind of like just doesn't follow that at all.
Right.
Everything's fine. It was weird.
That was weird, yeah. But so Sarah gets drugged, and then Chloe gets the shit beat out of her, and Frank shows up, and they have a wrestle, and then Chloe gets kicked in the head, and then that's the climax, I guess. I'm like, what? Like, I was like really, because again, like the other climactic scene, like, so first of all, Rachel wasn't even here, even though all this shit is supposed to be about her.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Chloe doesn't do anything. Like, there's nothing for her to do.
It was another one of the sequences where during like the intense standoff, Chloe it's a cutscene.
This time she doesn't even get to see it, though.
She doesn't get to see what happened either, which is even more weird.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, they didn't. I've seen multiple people complaining about the like kind of action scenes in this episode, like just not being animated very well. So I wonder if they just like didn't even want to worry about it, and so they did that. But
yeah, I could see of all the things they might have run out of time for, this really seemed like they were gonna show it and then either ran out of time or something.
Yeah,
because it was weird.
It was weird. So then Chloe gets kicked in the head and then wakes up, and Sarah's just kind of sitting there.
Everything's
chill,
totally
like
fine.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
And so I was like, my gut was like, oh damn,
Dream
like
sequence.
this is fine. Yeah, this is finally what I'm waiting for.
I thought it was a dream too.
She's dreaming, and like we're gonna get some kind of answer to like the supernatural element.
Yeah,
going
Sarah
on
has entered her
sequence.
dream in some capacity.
Right, like
and
I
that's
was
why
so
Sarah,
convinced.
who presumably should at very least be either high or dead,
yeah.
is just totally fine, just totally kicking it. And that was exactly what I thought too. And my wife was sitting next to me, and she looked at me. She's like, "Is this real?" Or
right?
Because Chloe gets kicked super hard enough to knock you out in the head, which would cause some amount of physical damage. She's fine.
Yeah.
And Sarah has freed herself and is just kind of kicking it, sitting there smoking on the table. Had decided to stay for unanswered reasons. Even though she immediately decides to leave upon Chloe waking up.
Yeah.
So it's a very, and obviously enough time has passed for, Frank to have presumably Frank to have untied Sarah and then
right. Yeah. And then I guess just left both of them there. Like you just leave Chloe on the floor. Like,
yeah, in
okay.
the same place. And
also
Sarah's
like
chill enough to be having a smoke. And it seemed like it was definitely going to be a dream. And then just,
yeah. And also, Chloe would have woken up first. Like I can't think of how being like, dosed with heroin while strapped to a chair, and somehow you're going to wake up before the person who just got kicked to the head. Like, getting a kick to the head is probably really bad, but like, I feel like you'd probably still wake up first from someone who got drugged. But
yeah.
that was like the first part of it that made me be like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem quite right. But then also just how like calm she is, just sitting in the chair like nothing happened. And also the fact that Damon and Frank are both gone, and there's no context for what happened. Yeah, they just magically disappeared. So like everything about the setup to that scene had me thinking, this is the big like final conversation, and it's going to be this dream sequence thing where Sarah is dying or dead, and she's like entering Chloe's dream to try and send one last
spirit
message.
On its way out has gone through Chloe, basically.
And we would get this context of like, what the Raven means, what the all-seeing eye has to do with any of this, why other people in the town, like Elliot, like Frank, have been experiencing dreams that are warning them about things in the future. Because I think we talked about this back when we recorded a thing about episode 2, but Frank has... if you look through Frank's things in episode 2, you can find evidence that he's been having weird dreams.
The clouds swallowing the town
right,
dreams.
which is what happens. You have evidence of Elliot having some kind of weird intuition that something bad is going to happen to Chloe, and implying that's the reason why he follows her in the 3rd episode to begin with, is because he has this.
And Chloe herself has it to an extent, even though they kind of may potentially be changing the context of that, but it seems like Chloe's having that too. So I really felt like that was where it was going.
Yeah, there's so many things.
Sarah could have like had a conversation with Chloe about Rachel too, and about how she's not all she craps up. Yeah, because they could have knocked it out. They could have
done it there. Yeah, they could have done it there. They could have had. Actually, yeah. Now that you bring it up, that could have been. It's another opportunity that they could have had to like kind of salvage is maybe a mean word, but it's the word that I'm feeling. Like they could have salvaged like what they were missing with this episode up until that point is have that conversation with Sarah and have Sarah bringing up things about her history with James and like using that as like this kind of dramatic irony to things that we know end up happening with Chloe and Rachel. But like they didn't. It became this conversation about that same like truth versus lies thing. And isn't the whole reason Sarah was even back in Arcadia Bay because she wanted to meet Rachel, and now all of a sudden she's decided, no, actually, never mind.
She just doesn't.
All this dramatic stuff. Yeah, all this dramatic stuff has happened, and rather than that inciting like this, more passionate feeling to be like, I've gone through all of this shit just to even be in this town. I'm going to meet my daughter and like bring some kind of resolution to this conflict. But no, I'm just gonna leave. Never mind. Like,
a lot of the game in general really feels like the developers and the writers originally created it with the intention of it going entirely off canon and having the big final choice be, is Chloe going to be with Rachel or not be with Rachel? We've given you this time to like her good elements, and now this episode is like shoving it down your throat with Elliot and that type, the doubt a little bit earlier, more subtly, I guess. But now we're getting it really aggressively. No, she's bad. And I thought that was going to be the conversation with William, and especially this conversation with Sarah at the very end. I thought was going to kind of go that direction. And we'd get some of the truth and lie, and then it would get wrapped around into, is that what's going on with Rachel? Is she manipulating you? Is she lying to you? And then it would ultimately turn into, are you going to, choose Rachel, choose not Rachel? And I'm assuming that they obviously can't do that because of the IP itself, but it felt like that was what a lot of the game was really trying to, up until certain parts in episode 3, where it felt like it was, wait, why are you focusing so, like, I got why, Rachel's dad was focusing on the truth versus lie themes, but then it felt like other people who like shouldn't have as much of a role in that, I guess. Or shouldn't have as much stake in that particular message or that particular theme are also kind of going into it. And it felt like, I don't know, it felt like they wanted it to be something else and then were required to bring it into a, truth or lie sequence that ultimately we can get back to base 0 for the, start of episode 1 of the original season.
Yeah. Just the whole conversation with Sarah just really felt like it was originally designed to be more than what it was. Yeah. And because they had built up all of these things, and again, like previous parts of this episode could have also had this conversation and it might have helped, but like they didn't. So then you finally get to this one and it also
You're like,
doesn't.
Okay, this is our last chance here,
right.
Last stop effectively. We have to have it now and it just never comes.
Yeah. And then it doesn't even have like a real resolution. It's just, she just like gets up and leaves. And I guess if you have, I don't know if it's only if you have the bracelet, like only if you get the bracelet from Rachel, you can convince her to stay, which also like, why that? Like
there's
that's kind of arbitrary.
Series of, I think 3 or 4 choices you have to get exactly right during the ending conversation. And she actually ended up staying she shows up during the ending montage.
During your ending montage? Okay.
Yeah, and I looked it up, and there's apparently during that sequence where you have to choose it's a certain number of the exact right choices of the 4 that you have the option for consistently for all of them in order to get her to show up at the end.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, they were a bit. I saw that too on Reddit. They were a bit arbitrary. Like it wasn't like the Kate scene, which to me would be like the most similar thing, because a lot of those like had like right answers and wrong answers, but these were just kind of like, I don't know. I read through it and I didn't agree with all of them, and I'm like,
yeah, I like the idea of it a lot. The idea of something being that hard to achieve for a big ending. The idea of like you have to get however many answers exactly right. You screw one of them up, no, your entire thing is scrapped. I did not necessarily love that the answers themselves did not seem thematically relevant to any of the themes. It didn't seem like the answers were, it's about truth. Okay, fine, we're going to go this way. Or, it's about, hiding who you really are and manipulation for Rachel or whatever. It didn't seem like it was relevant to any of those themes. It just seemed like it was like, this
Yeah.
is the answer
Just
we feel
arbitrary.
is the most well written based on the 4 we wrote, and so that's the good one, and the other
Yep.
ones are not. And like it was like, oh, it's cool, but at the same time, it's like it could have been more as far as, especially if you wanted to play into some of those themes of manipulation, it could have been something like that.
Yeah. It's something now that the story is done and I've been able to see some of the alternate things that can happen. It does almost feel like they were kind of using this format to play around with like having those alternate things happen, but because it's not worked into the main story that well, a lot of it just ends up feeling arbitrary, like the stuff with Sam and Nathan, or the stuff with Mikey and Drew and Steph, like the thing with the money that you can get in the first episode. Like there's so many different like variables of like where that money can end up, but like it doesn't matter. Like it's just like an arbitrary thing that they did as like a, I don't know, like a side thing. And that's not inherently bad to have those, I guess. But when the actual main story thing like doesn't really seem to, like, it also just kind of feels arbitrary, then I end up feeling like, well, why'd you spend time on these other ones that didn't really matter, these other variables that didn't really matter, and then not spend time on the main one that did.
Yeah.
Because that is like that whole ending montage. A lot of that ending montage like just felt so arbitrary to me. Like which version of these different moments you get. I'm like, why should I? Why do I even care at this point? Like, I feel like with stuff like that, you should, when your player gets to those moments, either it should feel organic, like they don't even realize that there is an alternate version of it because it just makes sense with what has happened, or it makes sense that it's happening the way that you're seeing it because you're like, yeah, I did make this decision and I figured that was what was going to be the result. And I just didn't feel that way with a lot of those moments at the end. Like, I don't know, it was weird. Like one example was the stuff with Nathan and Sam. Like in my version, Sam was reading a book by a tree, and then Nathan showed up, and then she got all offended and left. And rather than me being like, "Yep, based on my interactions with those characters, yeah, that makes sense. Like maybe I should have made some different choices," but instead I was like, "What?
Something must
Why
have
did
happened off screen.
yeah, like why did
made
that
this
happen? What? Huh?" Like, and because it didn't make sense, like I didn't even consider there was an alternate version. Apparently there's like 3 different versions of that one moment, and I didn't even consider that because to me it was just like, why? That doesn't make sense to me. So like my brain wasn't even considering what other versions there would be because it already didn't make sense to me why that happened. And like if you go back and look at whatever choices I had made previously, you could probably draw a line between like theoretical things that must have happened off screen, but then why is it there if all the important stuff is happening off screen then?
Yeah.
Which is frustrating. Like I still, and this can be said with a lot of elements that went into this game, I'm left at the end wondering what was the point, why was that there, other than to just be fan service, I guess. Like people wanted to know more about Nathan, so we put Nathan in there, but we couldn't work him into the main plot, so there's no actual plot with him, but there's different variations of things that maybe you can learn varying degrees about his backstory, kind of, but oh man, just I don't know. But I having that montage at the end was something that I predicted was going to happen, and I was like, I'm glad that they tried to do something like that, but I'm not happy with the execution. And I think the big part of that is because a lot of those variables are seemingly arbitrary, but also it just didn't span enough of a period of time for me, especially given how it ends, the very last moment of that game, which we haven't talked about yet, but apparently has been like this big topic of discussion with a lot of people. Like when they're finished playing that game, like that one last moment was just like this huge big deal for people.
Oh, yeah.
Which is that stinger moment where it shows Rachel's phone ringing in the dark room and you hear the snapshots happening in the background. Like that was like a really like jarring, weird gut punch.
Yeah, I was pissed that they did
Yeah.
that.
Me and Jenny were too. We were like, what? Why is this the last moment that you're showing us? Like what
we
does
already know that happens. It's like,
yeah, like I can envision a version of that ending montage where that would make emotional sense, but that ending montage would have probably had to be twice as long and cover a much longer period of time, like actually showing, like, I guess you could basically just continue it from where it left off, like showing all these great, meaningful moments for Rachel and Chloe's characters, but then start mirroring what happened with James and Sarah. Like, start showing us, they had a nice time, but it didn't work out for, whatever reasons, like which I mean, the game doesn't really address those reasons, even though I feel like they're there and it implies them. But anyway, like, you could have shown those two drifting apart. You could have implied Rachel getting involved with these things that we know she must have been involved with, given what we know in the first game. Not necessarily even giving anything away if you're worried about that for people who haven't played the first game, but at least like showing them drifting apart and showing that kind of heartbreak that Chloe must have been experiencing, that desperation of like trying to hold on to this person that she's losing slowly over time, because she's so used to losing these people very suddenly. Her dad dies, Max leaves. With Rachel, I always got the impression it was more of a gradual thing, and that's why she's so hung up on it by the time Max comes back. Because to her, Rachel isn't actually gone, because they had that connection for so long, and she was trying to hold on to it for so long. To have Rachel just suddenly disappear like the other two didn't have the same impact for her because of, I don't know, like just the emotional weight of everything, and her like being at a point after having developed through Rachel as a character, like Chloe just like not being able to accept that another person has disappeared from her life and whatnot. But I don't know, like I feel like if they had done a better job showing Chloe and Rachel drifting apart and then to end on that scene, it would be this more like effective emotional gut punch of like, oh man, like yeah, like that's what happened. Those two like drifted apart, and then Chloe wasn't there to help to save Rachel, I guess, or Rachel didn't, maybe like refused Chloe's help, or like however you want to interpret it, I guess. But the way it is right now, with the actual ending we got is, look at all these happy moments. Look how cute they are. Oh, by the way, one of them dies. Like, just no, why? Like, that's so just unnecessarily mean. I feel.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think like I was, like I said, I was pissed when I first saw it because it hurt. I was like, oh my god, But I think that maybe the reason they put it in there was as like a teaser for people who haven't played. So once I realized that, I'm like, okay.
That's the only reason I can think of that it's there. I cannot, and I feel like even if that was the reason, there were more tasteful ways to do it. Like, I feel like given what they did with the first two episodes, they had to have been more self-aware of, catering to a queer audience in particular, and to like have that story end in this like basically just this very blatant reminder of like bury your gays as a trope, like to just smack you in the face with that is just like really weird.
Well, if you haven't played Life is Strange, you don't know just from that she's dead. She could be having a modeling session and ignoring Chloe. That's
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I am, because of course that's the perspective I'm coming from as someone who's played the first game. So yeah, that is true, but I still feel like they could have still captured that same kind of teaser element without being so unnecessarily like rude, I guess, with it. Like, I don't know, like even something more optimistic or whatnot, like having the very last moment be Max coming back and like seeing a missing persons poster of Rachel or something. Like, I feel like that would have been just as much of like a draw, like that same idea that like Chloe's not there and something might be happening to Rachel.
Yeah, or Chloe putting up a missing poster.
Yeah,
I feel like going right from that.
That would have been good too.
General transition where it goes from them taking the photos together. So I think the one that she uses for the missing persons photo is like a cropped version of them together.
Yeah, that would have been great.
And so it could have been really like, oh look, here's the exact same thing: photo booth, photo booth, photo booth, photo booth, and then zoom in, snapshot, transition to the cropped version on the wall. You could have the zoom out. It could get or something.
Yeah,
you could have had I'm sure someone could easily, somebody out there will make that in a Source filmmaker, no doubt. So,
you're right.
No, that would have been a great teaser without being so hard on people who've already played the original game and know that Rachel's basically about to die, you know.
Yeah.
that
I
would've been
liked
better.
it as far as it being like an emotional heavy beat. I did like it. It felt like it was the obvious, like it felt like a cheap shot.
It was
felt
so
like
cheap,
the
yeah.
obvious cheap shot to
Yeah.
go. It was like, oh, like, hey, do you guys remember this now? Here's like objectively the worst thing short of like, here's a close up of Rachel's corpse in a hole. You know,
Jesus,
it
yeah.
felt like it was the
Yeah.
obvious thing that they would have shown at the end there. It was like, oh, that hurts, but at the same time, like, it came on a little strong. It was Elliot levels of strong as opposed to like a little more nuanced and chilled back, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So we've basically gone through the paces of the majority of the episode at this point. I guess just to put my big broad kind of thought out there, like the main primary thing about this episode that really let me down was that it took the focus off of Rachel and Chloe and just did a bunch of seemingly arbitrary stuff regarding characters connected to Rachel. Like, even if they were like more directly connected to Chloe, maybe that would have worked better because the story's supposed to be from Chloe's perspective. But like, she was just like along for the ride and just being Rachel's errand girl and just like doing what everyone told her to do without questioning it, and just and the climax wasn't even about her and Rachel, even though that was very clearly, to me, that's at least what I interpreted based on the first two episodes. That was the core mechanic of the story, was the relationship between these two characters, and thus helping set up things that we find out later on in the first game, like things about Chloe as a person that were influenced because of her relationship with this other character, and to just not even really have them interacting much in the final episode. It just really felt like when they were, I don't know, conceiving the story for the final act, they had all of these like set pieces and these concepts of things they wanted the player to do or experience, but like didn't actually figure out how to get them to tie into that core relationship. And so they just like didn't, like, I don't know. It's quite frustrating to me because it really sucks away what things I liked from the previous two episodes, because part of why I liked them so much was that it felt like they were building to something, and then it turns out they weren't. And then I guess
think some of that kind of touches a little bit on, I think it was the last time we talked.
Yeah.
I think it touches on the fact that it really does have its constraints due to the nature of it being a prequel. That it's very clear the story wants to go and was even to an extent designed to go in to a certain place in a certain direction, and like it can't fully get there because like, well, we have to make it so that Chloe and Rachel are together and that Chloe is obedient and infatuated. So like, even though that's thematically a thing we've built up, we can't really effectively give you a way to shut Rachel down on that front, because then it makes like the first game not work. It doesn't work for the first game as well. And so it's like we kind of have to, stifle that particular thematic vein in a sense.
I guess what I'm reminded of, and it's actually interesting because this game also, I think we brought up last time, The Last of Us had a prequel thing, like a prequel episode, I guess you could call it, that takes place before the main game. But the actual main story of The Last of Us itself, the way that story ended, which I don't want to, because this isn't a Last of Us podcast, but the way that the story of The Last of Us ends, like that final note, those final moments, I feel like gets at some similar themes that this final episode of Before the Storm is getting at. And the way that ended was in a believable manner to me, I guess, with regards to accepting that, not everyone is going to tell the truth all the time, that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that you won't stay by them, that you don't stay by their side, even if you have reason to believe they might be lying to you. And it was frustrating to me that this episode could have still done that. Like, I could see them even don't even worry about like the whole like maybe Rachel's lying to me, because like I don't even necessarily get that impression, but I do get the impression that they were building up towards, Rachel's not entirely innocent. Rachel persuades people to get what she wants. She's really stubborn. She is going to get what she wants, period. Like so many elements of the first two episodes, and even this episode, like built up towards that idea. And
I could see Chloe like confronting that, accepting it, and still deciding, this doesn't break it for me. Like this doesn't mean isn't bad enough that I can't deal with it for the sake of being with this person, because I really need this. I need to be needed by this person right now. And it was just a letdown to me that they didn't even like resolve those questions, those concerns. They were just like, never mind all that. Just yeah.
Yeah, like to me, like
Chloe thinks Rachel's great, and that's that.
And that's that. Yeah. And we're supposed to think that Rachel's great too. Is something that I felt like the episode as a whole implicitly is trying to tell us, that like we're not supposed to. Don't worry about that. Look at how great Rachel is. Look at all these people around her are so concerned about her, and everything is revolving around her because she's so great, and she just is great. Just don't worry about it.
and like
what about? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say just about that. I don't think they didn't need to make the final choice like a Rachel or not Rachel kind of choice, but
right.
For me, they needed to acknowledge, in the montage and preferably more throughout the episode than they did, just this theme that they had built up. And it was this really interesting thing to me, and it was subtle, and I thought that that how they were portraying Rachel was like just so well done in the first two episodes, and to an extent in the third episode also. But it was like the narration, like how the story was being told. It's like they didn't want you to see it, that final montage. It was basically a happily ever after montage, except for the very last scene, which I thought was ridiculous. And it's like they could have, it was, and they could have even saved it a little bit for me, quite a lot actually, if in that final montage they'd included some clips. They didn't even have to be like overtly like drifting apart or anything, but just like a little bit of like showing that Chloe didn't even have to notice, like because maybe Chloe doesn't notice, but we as an audience can notice that Rachel is not is not being totally truthful and genuine and all that. Yeah, just the fact that they dropped it was so disappointing.
Yeah, like I can't help but feel like they just changed their minds, like because the stuff got cut from the original Life is Strange game for sure, but like this feels to me like even more noticeable. And I guess the big reason why is because they just abandoned that core mechanic, the relationship between those two characters. Because as much as stuff, was weird about the final episode of the original Life is Strange game, as much stuff as might have gotten cut out of that, and as much as they might have just kind of ditched a lot of these kind of random side character stories that they had started, the core focus of the story was and is in the end about the relationship between Max and Chloe. That's the core of the story. And this episode loses that like almost entirely for me. Like it's like they just, I don't know if they just like changed their mind, or they just like, man, I just don't know. Like it really feels like it didn't come together as originally planned, and I can't figure out if that's because they decided that they like Rachel more than they thought they would and they wanted to have a happier ending or something, or if they were worried that it might cause like, negative feelings about the story and about Rachel as a character, or man, I just don't know what, but I really feel like this wasn't what they were planning to do with their story. Like it feels like a lot of things that were going to be different and more meaningful than they are got like set aside, and that's really annoying, mainly because that core mechanic of that main relationship was one of those things that got set aside.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Do you have any broad overall thoughts about how the story has resolved, Koethe?
I think a lot of what you said pretty much hit the nail on the head for me. I think that it does feel like, while the first season had its shortcomings on that, the last episode, and particularly the very ending of it, it felt like a lot of those were due to, potentially budget restrictions or time crunches. Whereas it feels like this one didn't necessarily, run out of budget or time, save for maybe the ending montage. I'm unclear if that was a budget / time restriction or just an artistic choice that I was not fond of. But the feeling on this one does definitely feel like the overall issue that it would run into was more of one of the actual plot had to change. The actual
Yeah.
story and the focus had to shift away from what it was originally designed to. And while you can take a single storyline and truncate the ending and make it hyper compressed and it's noticeable, it's a lot more noticeable if you take a certain storyline and at the last minute branch it off into something that it was
Right.
at least seemingly not designed to go towards.
Yeah.
And like I said, I still very much loved the episode, honestly. But when I look at it, like I said, I hear these criticisms of it, and I'm like, I absolutely agree with them. I still very much think that it has shortcomings, that the episode did branch off into a way that was not set up as effectively as it could. You know, not to say that they couldn't have had the whole three episode arc be about truth and lies,
Yeah.
but 2.5 episodes, you know, of content were not about that. The only real indicator that this one was going to be was that very intro scene, which seemed like it was just from Rachel Amber's father's point of view, so that's why he's obsessed with it. But then it kind of seemed like, oh no, the entire episode is about this thing that Rachel Amber's father has gone over, as opposed to, you know, especially if you look at the marketing material for this, it was, is there a single person that defines a moment of your life? It's not, is there a certain moral about gray areas of truth that defines a certain moment of your life?
Yeah.
And so that leads me to believe they must have had, for whatever reason, they had to shift it at the end, whether that was, you know, interest testing did not check out with the other moral for whatever, with the other thematic elements for whatever reason, or, you know, maybe there was some budget restriction or time restriction. They had to cut that out, and they chose to cut that part as opposed to the truth elements, or whether it was, you know, some higher up element over at Square said, no, we want Rachel to be this way. This is the way we need Rachel for X or Y
Unfortunately,
reason.
that's like, that would be my guess.
Yeah.
That's always my assumption, is like, is that somewhere on the producer side they said, no, our data says this, or no, for franchising reasons, we need this.
Yeah.
Which is always the least fortunate, but, you know.
Yep. But such things happen, I guess. Yep.
Exactly.
It does.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it does end up feeling more noticeable with these episodic games, I think.
Absolutely.
Than other games.
Well, they have time to react to like the fans' reaction of the previous episodes and stuff.
Yeah, and something that I feel like I was experiencing with the first 2 episodes of this game was that this game feels like it wasn't designed to be an episodic story the way the first game was. It feels like they had an entire story in mind, and then it got broken into 3 episodes, which is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, especially with this 3rd episode, it felt like they became like more self-aware that it's the 3rd episode. And so they tried to like do things with it to make it feel more like an episode rather than a conclusion to the overall story is probably one way I would phrase it. And I think that's part of what makes it inconsistent with the other 2. Because while I didn't like episode 1 that much when I played it, after I played episode 2, I liked episode 1 more because having 2 parts of the story made it feel like I was looking at a more cohesive whole. And so I was really hoping that episode 3 would make everything come together, and instead
it tie it all together, and kind of fragmented it into a different direction.
Instead I actually feel more frustrated now, and a big part of that is because I think that there's a lot of good stuff going on with this game. I think that this development team has a lot of potential, and they've proven they can do a lot of the kinds of things that this sort of game requires. They've proven they can do it thoughtfully and well, and so it's really weird and frustrating to like have them like miss the forest for the trees, I guess would be a way of putting it. Like that's what it feels like to me, and that's too bad because I was really rooting for him, and I'm definitely like whatever they work on next. I guess unless it's another like it's before the Storm season 2, I honestly might pass, to be honest, because this just gave me way too much stress, and they really do. I feel like they've already like pushed it like just to that line for me where I'm like, any more beyond this and I'm just gonna be like, this is for sure just like milking this at this point. Don't do that. But whatever they work on next after this, like I'm definitely going to be paying attention to it, and I'm definitely going to be supportive of that team. And there's like 2 people in the dev team I've been in touch with who've like for months have been like, I really want to talk with you about what we've been doing, and I can't yet because the story's not out there yet, but there's definitely stuff I want to talk with you about. So like I want to have those conversations with those people, and part of that is going to be me asking some of these questions that they might not be able to answer, but like it's no one at like Don't Nod has ever even like replied to like me sending them messages. So like at the very least it's cool to see this dev team who like is aware of like what kind of a passionate fandom that they have and willing to engage with that fandom. Like I think that is good. I just wish that the actual thing that they made was something I could more readily endorse, I guess.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I was going to say, I'd be really interested in the future if they end up doing a standalone
that's
entry, even if it's into the Life is Strange universe.
Yeah.
If it is just a standalone, even if it's a single episode, like I think it was Telltale did like a one-off 400 whatever days for.
Oh yeah, and that was actually good. That's one of the best episodes they've made.
If
of anything,
if they did something like that for Life is Strange, I could see that being incredibly good because if they can have, a throwaway one-off one-line reference to the rest of the universe and then everything else is just their own creation, they are allowed to take these characters wherever the hell they want. They don't have to fit into a prequel's, problematic structuring for story. I could see them being absolutely fantastic at it because a lot of the elements they quite frankly did do significantly better than Don't Nod did with certain elements of Before the Storm. And I feel like a lot of the elements that were problematic are just due to it, odd issues that may or may not have come from overhead and, problems just with the nature of prequels in general.
Yeah.
So I'd be super interested to see where they'll go next, especially if it is some sort of independent, soloed out entry into Life is Strange.
Yeah. That is basically what I'm hoping for, is whether it's Life is Strange or not, that whatever they work on next is like their own, like something original.
Yeah.
And really, there's so few of that with these kinds of games in general, because like it's mainly been Telltale has been the company that's primarily been producing this type of game, and all of their stuff is licensed. Like
I was gonna say, it's all pre-existing franchises.
Like and that's not inherently bad, but it does limit what they can do. Like they have done some good jobs of like with certain franchises, like branching things out and doing something fresh and original with it that maybe you weren't expecting. Like I haven't played the second season of their Batman game, but I liked that the first season of their Batman game was straight up, this is a different Batman. Like we're not adhering to any.
Like it was trying to be just ride that Christopher Nolan Batman.
Right. It was
type.
Their own version of Batman, and they actually did some legitimately like interesting twists on the Batman universe that I haven't seen done before, which at this point, with how many damn versions of Batman there are, like that's kind of hard to do.
It was refreshing to see, especially in that context.
Yeah. But even that is still, it's Batman. Like you're still expected to know.
We gotta get that Joker.
That's the Joker. He's not going to be called the Joker, but you definitely know that's the Joker. And like that is part of the story, the kind of story that they're telling. And like I can appreciate that. And like I even recently I started working on a little side project that part of what that story will be about is you kind of having some familiarity with like what these characters or what the ideas are based off of or where they might have originated from, whatever. So like I definitely appreciate that, but I really want to see more games in this field, like this kind of interactive novel kind of game, just be original stories, because that's a big part of why Life is Strange took off in the first place, I think, was that it had this very cinematic presentation, but it was new and original, and there was no, like, you didn't know where the story was going to go.
Of it.
Right. Whereas most games like that, whereas most games like that, we at least have some idea just because it's based off of something pre-existing. But what are your thoughts, Riley? What are you kind of hoping or expecting to see from Deck 9 going forward?
Kind of like what you guys were talking about. Just I love games like this, I guess, sort of like Life is Strange, but using this format, you could write about anything. So I hope that I hope they do.
Yeah. Yep. I would like to think so. And either way, before that happens, we are going to get that farewell episode, so we will be reconvening after that. So probably sometime early next year. And then I am feeling pretty certain that before we have any idea of what Deck 9 will work on after that, we're going to find out what the next Life is Strange game is.
What
from
the deal
Don't
with
Nod.
Life is Strange 2
Ooh, that's
is,
exciting.
Yeah, and I'm very interested in that, and I'm definitely going to be curious to see what they will apply, like what lessons they've learned from the original Life is Strange, and potentially what lessons they might be able to learn from Before the Storm as well, and how they might apply those to whatever they're working on currently.
One thing I
But-
kind of wondered was like how Don't Nod feels about Before the Storm in a way, because I was just imagining like imagine you write this wonderful story, you create this beautiful game, people love it, and then somebody like tacks a prequel onto the beginning of it, which now many players might play before they experience your game.
Yeah.
And just how that might, I hope
I
hope
have
they feel
not
okay about
seen
it.
a lot from Don't Nod about. I think I forget if it was one of us last episode that was mentioning this, but I've not seen a huge lot from Don't Nod about Before the
Nope.
Storm.
Yeah.
Short of like, I think their official Twitter channel will periodically repost things about it for like obvious reasons, but I don't think like I've not seen any of like the actual core development members or like production members really talking heavily about the prequel.
Yeah.
Which like maybe it's just because it's not their thing, but I have to hope it's not like a feeling of like, ill will or even just negativity or bitterness about it existing, because that would obviously be unfortunate.
I
from a
could see
creative
that though.
standpoint.
I mean, if I were
Oh,
in their
absolutely,
shoes, I might feel
absolutely.
that way.
Yeah. Yep. One of the things to keep in mind with that too is that it is a whole development studio. So like even if like the big, well, I can't pronounce their names, but the two big guys that we
Yeah.
always associate
Yeah.
with Michelle and Luke. Is that his name? I don't know if I'm pronouncing their
I can't
first names
remember.
right even, but
Oh,
the,
yeah.
I think those are like the two main directors of the story or of the game. Like one was like the story director and one was the game director, something like that. Those two big guys that everyone always associates with this first game. They were in the video confirming that they were working on another Life is Strange game. Like even if those two guys were okay with it, that doesn't necessarily like speak for all the other people that worked on that game either.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting. That is because I have talked with like one or two people at Don't Nod, and like they couldn't really say anything because of obvious reasons, but the general impression that I got was that there isn't like a blanket feeling of like approval or disapproval from like overall from the studio. It sounds like it's probably kind of a mixed thing, which would make perfect sense because it's an entire team of people. There'd be differing views. And like what I do get is like the impression I get from what I've seen of those two main guys, at least, is that they at least are supportive of Deck 9 as a development team. Like I have gotten that impression, which is good, but I still have yet to get any clear idea of like how they or people at Don't Nod feel about this prequel existing, much less the actual content,
the specifics of the
prequel.
story or the characters.
And I have a feeling we're not going to get the truth behind that anytime soon, if ever. Which
I was going to say, I can't imagine
Just some
that's
documentary like
under
50 years from now.
Right,
Maybe not quite that long.
Such like that.
Yeah, but
general best practices.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's got to be hard for them. It's got to be hard to be in Deck 9's position, because if you were offered to do this, why would you say no? And I've vented about this previously, maybe not on the podcast, but there have been multiple instances in the fandom of creators in the fandom being similarly like asked to represent Before the Storm and represent Amber Price as a ship in their creative work in ways that make me uncomfortable and ways that made them uncomfortable. And it's like, well, how can you say no to like being officially connected to the official Life is Strange brand, even if it's something that you're not comfortable working on or isn't really why you care about Life is
it's not
Strange.
something you would do in a million years.
Yeah,
it's an
like
opportunity.
I would not.
Like,
and it just really bothers me to like have a corporation that owns this property like kind of going around to different people connected to the first game, like trying to get them to like represent this new thing yeah, it just makes me really uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, I'm at least relieved that the story is done, and that now I'm hoping we're just gonna, after we're gonna have this farewell episode, and I assume it's gonna be fluffy and not really muddle with anything like this prequel might have, and then we're just gonna finally move on. That's like, I just want us to just be able to move forward with new characters, new stories, learn from the good and the bad of this prequel and from the original game, and like apply it to new characters and new stories. That's really what I would like to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Koethe, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I'm looking forward to the farewell episode, and I'm certainly going to be curious if it does implement any dark thematic elements, or if it is, like you said, if it's going to. I'm expecting a very fluffy, lots of feels. It's going to be sad and heartstring pulley. That's what I'm anticipating.
Yeah.
But I don't expect many like heavy thematic things to come up in it. So I'm curious to see if that's going to be on point, or if we are going to get some weird dark elements, or if the episode is going to end with next time on Before the Storm 2. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. And what about you, Riley?
We didn't talk about the final choice. Was it just not that interesting?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a good point, but yeah, I feel like that's If you have any thoughts about that, feel free to.
I'm curious what you guys picked.
Oh man, that was the easiest choice for me in like the entire game. Definitely at least the easiest like big important decision, but probably just the easiest choice in general. I am always like, I can acknowledge that there are times when it might be better in the moment to not tell the truth. But with this kind of situation, I'm just like, why would you not? Like, why? I definitely did not buy into this whole, we have to protect her from the truth because it would be painful. I'm like, yeah, life is fucking painful. Dealing with the truth is fucking painful. But like, it's not good to run away from that when you have the opportunity to confront it. Like, I'm always of the opinion that it's better to confront those things. Even, like, maybe you're not immediately ready, but like you're gonna have to deal with it sooner or later. So just deal with it, learn from it, like accept it, and then move forward. And so yeah, so that was a very easy decision for me. What about you, Koethe?
I ended up going with the same one as you. I actually was on the verge of choosing the lie option. My wife ended up talking me out of it. The only reason being, again, my issue with it being a prequel. I know how I know what ends up happening with Rachel, and I figured, and this directed a lot of my choices throughout, but I guess my thought was, at least in my head, I'll give her that happy remaining, 2 or 3 years with her dad because she's going to bite it anyways, and she might as well have that happy time. So yeah. I feel like outside of that, I would always have gone with the tell the truth, 100% of the time. But I feel like in that context, it was in my head to like, let's let her have this one, just because I have this terrible premonition of what's going to happen,
right?
And with that, inadvertently playing Max instead of Chloe for a moment there, I suppose.
Yeah, because that is the thing with her character, is that Max's character does actually lie. They are usually white lies. But her character does lie quite more than you would think. Like if you actually go back to the original game,
if you really go
and really pay attention, she lies a lot actually. And it's usually for the sake of like, kind of keeping things diplomatic or keeping things neutral. Like not necessarily trying to make herself look great, though she does do some of that, especially if you use the rewind. But just trying to like not make things seem weird. So like, yeah, I could see if Max was in that position, I could definitely see her going along with the not telling the truth thing for the sake of trying to keep that other person more happy. But because the thing is, I don't think like morally that there is a right or wrong answer to that question. It's just for me personally, like,
oh, absolutely.
Like for me personally, there's no question, like in terms of how I view like growing up as a person, like that's how I view it. But no, I think that final decision does have that element of moral gray area that makes either choice like valid, like depending on how you're interpreting things.
What about you, Riley? What did you want to say about that last part?
Yeah, I thought it was a good choice. I mean, you know, for all that I've said about that I don't like that they sort of took it there and sort of replaced the main theme. I thought that, you know, without that context, just in and of itself, it was a really interesting choice in the way they set it up and everything. My wife and I had like a pretty good conversation about it, and we decided to tell the truth. And I think one of the questions that I kind of posed was like, is there inherent value in the truth? You know, if there's not, then it sort of becomes a question of what's best for Rachel, and that is a little bit more debatable. But I think there's inherent value in the truth, and kind of like what you were saying, Desma. There's like with growing up, like you know, life, especially in America and for people who kind of live more sheltered lives, you don't get you know, so many opportunities to have really hard truths thrown at you and to kind of have your perspective expanded. So to protect her from this one in a way is robbing her of it, because you know, if you look back on your life and all the hard things you've been through, that's what a lot of people say have shaped them and what have really enriched their lives. So you know, it's you could see it as protecting her, or you could see it as taking that away from her, and that's, you know, so those two things were kind of what I considered, and so I thought it was a good choice.
Yeah.
I think at the time that I played it through, I played the game, I think 2 or 3 days after it came out. I think at the time that I played it through, it was actually a perfect 50-50 split on that last
makes
last
sense.
decision, which I thought was, I think that's one of the only times I've ever seen the actual perfect 50-50, so I thought that was kind of neat.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it was like 51-49, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's
really
what it was
close.
for me too. Yeah. But so we have gone through that whole finale episode and gone over some thoughts on the story in general. Definitely a good chat, good conversation. I had a good feeling that at least one of you two would be a little more, I guess, optimistic to help balance my more negativity. But because you did help, like, kind of open my eyes a bit to some like alternate perspectives that I hadn't considered. So that's good, and I appreciate that. But I also, just as a whole, was not very happy with this episode, and that really makes me sad, because like I do really want to see this team reach their potential, and hopefully they will. I at the very least, I'm glad that they were able to finish this game and get it out there, and that it, you know, had the amount of detail to it that it did, because I do think that helps put them on the map as like they're a studio that can make this kind of game with this kind of presentation, and there's not a lot of that out there right now. So here's hoping that the farewell episode turns out good. We will come back together to talk about that later on, probably early next year. But I will end up trying to record a separate session with Jenny, just to kind of get her thoughts on things. But yeah, so thanks a lot for listening if you have, and thank you, Koethe, thank you, Riley, for joining me here today. And that'll be it for this time. We'll see you guys next time. Later days.
See you later.